The wood beneath my boots does not merely creak, it groans, like a dying man refusing to let go of his last breath. They call her the Iron Maiden, my ship. A fitting name, I suppose, for she is cold, unyielding, and has taken more lives into her embrace than the plague itself. I am Captain Alistair Blackwood, though the Crown has other names for me: Scourge, Devil, Ghost of the Nassau. I care little for titles. They are heavy things, useless when the sea decides to rise up and swallow you whole. Out here, under the bruised purple of the twilight sky, titles do not keep the water from your lungs. Only wood, canvas, and the loyalty of a crew bought with gold and fear can do that. I stood at the helm, the wheels slick with the humidity of the coming storm. The air tasted of ozone and stale grog. My quartermaster, Silas, approached from the shadows of the mizzenmast. He was a jagged man, scar-faced and missing an ear from a disagreement with a Portuguese sabre in Lisbon. "The men are restless, Captain," Silas murmured, his voice sounding like gravel grinding together. 3 weeks without a prize. The water barrels are tasting of rot, and the biscuit is more weevil than flour. I didn't turn to look at him. My eyes were fixed on the horizon, where the sun was bleeding into the ocean. Hunger sharpens the senses, Silas. It makes them mean. I need them mean for what comes next. And what comes next, Alistair? He was the only one allowed to use my given name, a privilege earned in blood 10 years ago off the coast of Madagascar. We are sailing into nothingness. The charts end here. The men, they whisper of the edge. I laughed, a dry, harsh sound that was snatched away by the wind. The edge, superstition for children and cowards. There is no edge, Silas, only more sea, and beyond that sea, the San Gabriel. The name hung in the air between us. The San Gabriel. The Spanish treasure galleon that had become a ghost story among thieves. It was said to carry the dowry of a princess, gold minted in the fires of the New World, emeralds the size of fists, and a relic that the Vatican itself wanted erased from existence. Most said it sank 20 years ago. I knew better. I had the map, a piece of skin, tattooed and preserved, torn from the back of a dying Spaniard in a Tortuga brothel. "The San Gabriel is a myth," Silas said, though I saw the glint of greed in his one good eye. "Myths don't leave wakes," I replied, pulling the parchment from my coat pocket. It was wrapped in oilskin to protect it from the spray. "And they don't leave trails of wreckage. We found the debris 2 days ago, did we not? Spanish oak, rigging that hasn't been used in a decade." Silas fell silent. He knew I was right, or perhaps he just feared what would happen if he proved me wrong. The wind picked up, howling through the rigging. The maiden pitched forward, her nose diving into a swell before rising violently. The storm was no longer a threat. It was a promise. "All hands on deck!" I roared, my voice cutting through the rising gale. "Reef the mainsail, batten down the hatches. If any man falls overboard, he belongs to the sea. I'll not turn back for clumsy fools." The deck erupted into chaos. Men scrambled up the ratlines, barefoot and cursing. The canvas snapped and cracked like pistol shots as the wind filled it. I gripped the wheel tighter, fighting the ocean for control. This was where I truly lived, not in the drunken haze of a port tavern, nor in the soft bed of a whore, but here, fighting God's own fury. As the first wave crashed over the bow, soaking the planks in foam, I saw him. A young lad, no older than 16, struggling with a rope near the starboard rail. He was new, a boy named Thomas, who had run away from a cooperage in Bristol seeking adventure. He was about to find death instead. The ship lurched. Thomas lost his footing. He slid toward the rail, his eyes wide with the terror of the realized void. I didn't think. Instinct, honed by 20 years of survival, took over. I lashed the wheel with a rope to hold the course and vaulted down the stairs to the main deck. The deck was slick, treacherous. I hit the wood hard, sliding toward him just as he went over the side. My hand shot out, my fingers closing around the rough fabric of his shirt. The strain tore at my shoulder socket. He dangled there, suspended over the churning black water, screaming something unintelligible. "Hold fast, boy," I grunted, bracing my boots against a cleat. With a heave that made my vision swim, I hauled him back over the rail. We collapsed onto the wet deck, gasping. He looked at me, shivering, his face pale as the moon. "Captain, Save your breath," I snarled, standing up and towering over him. "Next time, bind yourself to the mast or learn to fly. I won't catch you twice." I returned to the helm, soaked and aching, but alive. Silas was there, watching me with a strange expression. "You saved him," Silas shouted over the wind. "He owes me a life now," I shouted back, grabbing the wheel again. "A dead man pays no debts." The storm raged for 6 hours. We fought the Maiden through valleys of water that eclipsed the masts. Lightning tore the sky apart, illuminating the terrified faces of the crew in strobe light flashes. But we held. The ship held. When the dawn broke, the sea was calm, the water a sheet of grey glass. The air was still, unnervingly so. The fog was thick, obscuring everything beyond the bowsprit. "Damage report," I called out. "Main topsail is torn, Captain." 2 men injured, none lost, Silas reported. But what?" Silas pointed into the fog. "Listen." I strained my ears. Silence. And then a sound, not the wind, not the waves. It was a bell, a tolling bell, deep and mournful, coming from dead ahead. I walked to the bow, peering into the mist. Slowly a shape began to materialize. Massive, ragged, sails hanging in tatters like the shrouds of a corpse. The wood was black, covered in barnacles and seaweed. It was a galleon. An ancient Spanish galleon, the San Gabriel. It sat motionless in the water, a silent tomb. There were no lights, no movement, just the rhythmic tolling of that bell, swinging with the gentle roll of the dead ship. "God's blood," Silas whispered behind me. "It's real." "Prepare the longboat," I ordered, checking the flintlock pistol at my belt and loosening my cutlass in its scabbard. My heart hammered against my ribs, not fear, but the thrill of the hunt. "And pick 10 men, the strongest. The ones who don't believe in ghosts." I looked at the derelict ship looming out of the fog. It felt like the ship was watching us back. "We go aboard," I said, my voice low. "Whatever is on that ship, it belongs to me." The oars dipped into the grey water with barely a splash. The silence of the morning fog was oppressive, pressing against my eardrums like physical weight. 10 of us sat in the longboat, a collection of cutthroats and thieves who would usually be boasting or gambling, now rendered mute by the looming shadow of the San Gabriel. The galleon was a corpse of a ship. Her hull was bloated with rot, timbers blackened by years of drift. Great lacerations scarred her sides, wounds from cannon fire that had long since cooled. But it was the smell that hit us first, not the clean salt of the sea, nor the usual stench of bilge water. It was a sweet, cloying decay, like flowers left too long on a grave, mixed with the copper tang of old blood. "Steady," I whispered, though there was no need. The men were rowing with a mechanical stiffness, their eyes locked on the dark portholes above us. Silas sat at the bow, holding a lantern despite the daylight. The fog was so thick that the sun was merely a pale bruise in the sky. "The bell stopped," he noted. He was right. The moment our boat had touched the water, the rhythmic tolling from the San Gabriel had ceased. The sudden silence was far worse than the noise. We pulled alongside the rotting hull. Barnacles crunched under the wood of our boat. I stood up, grabbing the rusted chains of the main whale. "Secure the boat. Keep your pistols dry and your blades loose. If anything moves and isn't one of us, kill it." I climbed first. The wood of the hull was slick with slime, crumbling under my boots. I hauled myself over the gunwale and dropped onto the main deck. It was empty. The deck was a graveyard of debris. Tattered ropes lay coiled like sleeping snakes. Barrels were overturned, their contents long since washed away. But there were no bodies, no skeletons picking at the planks, just emptiness. The ship felt hollow. "Spread out," I commanded as the rest of the men scrambled aboard, weapons drawn. "Check the forecastle and the quarterdeck. Silas, with me to the captain's cabin." As we walked across the deck, the wood felt spongy. Every step released a puff of that sickly sweet scent. We passed the ship's bell near the mainmast. I paused to look at it. It was bronze, green with verdigris, and inscribed with Latin I couldn't read. But what chilled my blood was the rope attached to the clapper. It was frayed, severed high up. There was no wind. The ship wasn't rocking. What had been ringing it? I caught Silas's eye. He had seen it too. He gripped his cutlass tighter, his knuckles white. We reached the heavy oak doors of the captain's cabin. They were barred from the outside. Thick planks of wood had been nailed across the frame, sealing whatever was inside. "Someone wanted to keep something in," Silas muttered. "Or keep everyone else out," I replied. I wedged the tip of my cutlass behind one of the planks and heaved. The rotted wood gave way with a wet snap. We tore the barricade down, the noise echoing too loudly in the silence. I kicked the door open. Dust motes danced in the shaft of light from the open door. The cabin was opulent, or it had been once. Velvet curtains, now moth-eaten, hung by the stern windows. A mahogany desk dominated the center, cluttered with maps and navigational instruments of gold and brass. And there, sitting in the high-backed chair behind the desk, was the captain. He was not a skeleton. He was preserved. His skin was like parchment, stretched tight over his bones, grey and leathery. He wore the full regalia of a Spanish admiral, the gold braiding tarnished but intact. His hands were resting on a leather-bound logbook. But his eyes were missing. The sockets were empty, staring blindly at the door. "Mother of God," Silas breathed. I stepped forward, ignoring the urge to cross myself. I wasn't a pious man, but the air in this room felt heavy with sin. I reached out and gently pulled the logbook from under the dead man's hands. The fingers were stiff, dry as twigs. I opened the book to the final entry. The ink was faded, the handwriting erratic, as if written by a shaking hand. December 14th, 1695. The crew is gone. The shadows have taken them. I can hear them scratching at the door. They want the idol. They whisper to me in voices that belong to my wife, my children. I have swallowed the key. I will not let it leave this ship. May God have mercy on my soul, for the Deep One will not. "The Deep One?" Silas asked, reading over my shoulder. "Superstitious nonsense," I said, though my voice lacked conviction. Madness brought on by scurvy and isolation. "Captain!" A scream pierced the air from the deck below. It was Thomas, the boy I had saved. I spun around, jamming the logbook into my coat. "Deck! Now!" We sprinted out of the cabin, boots thundering on the rotting wood. We reached the railing overlooking the main deck just in time to see the hatch to the cargo hold burst open. The men were backing away, muskets raised. Thomas was on the ground, scrambling backward on his elbows, pointing at the open hatch. "It grabbed him!" Thomas shrieked. "It grabbed Miller!" "Who grabbed him?" I roared, jumping down the stairs to the main deck. "The dark!" the boy cried. "The dark took him!" I looked at the open hatch. It was a maw of absolute blackness. The smell of sweet decay was overpowering now, rolling out of the hold like a physical wave. "Miller!" I shouted into the darkness. Silence. Then a sound, a wet, slithering sound, like wet leather dragging across stone. "Get back to the longboat," I ordered, backing away slowly, my pistol raised. "Everyone, move! Now!" But before we could retreat, the ship groaned. A deep, resonant vibration that shook the very keel. The San Gabriel wasn't just drifting anymore. It was waking up. From the darkness of the hold, something was rising. It wasn't a man. It wasn't a beast I had ever seen in the natural world. It looked like a vine, thick as a man's thigh, but made of black, glistening muscle. It pulsed, oozing a thick, dark slime. "Open fire!" I yelled. 5 muskets discharged at once. The balls struck the mass, tearing into the flesh, but it didn't recoil. Instead, it seemed to expand, splitting open to reveal rows of translucent needle-like teeth. "Run!" Silas screamed. We turned and ran for the rail, but the ship itself seemed to be fighting us. The planks buckled, ropes whipped out as if controlled by an unseen hand, snapping at our ankles. We dove over the gunwale, abandoning dignity for survival. I hit the water hard, the cold shock stealing my breath. I surfaced, gasping, and saw the men scrambling into the longboat. "Pull, pull!" I commanded as they hauled me in. As we rowed frantically away from the cursed galleon, I looked back. The black tendril had retreated. The ship was silent again. The bell began to toll, clang, clang, clang. But it was what I saw in the stern windows of the captain's cabin that froze my blood. The dead captain was standing at the window. He was watching us leave, and he was smiling. We rowed until our muscles burned like fire, putting distance between us and that accursed hulk of rotting wood. No one spoke. The only sounds were the desperate splash of oars and the heavy breathing of terrified men. Even Silas, usually as stoic as a granite cliff, kept glancing over his shoulder, expecting that black tendril to rise from the depths and drag us all down to hell. When the Iron Maiden loomed out of the fog, she looked less like a ship and more like a sanctuary. The crew aboard had lowered the davits, their faces pale as they saw our frantic approach. We hooked on, and they hauled us up with a speed that betrayed their own unease. I hit the deck and immediately collapsed against the bulwark, my chest heaving. The air here tasted different, cleaner, though still heavy with the metallic tang of the coming storm. "Cut the lines!" I barked, struggling to my feet. "Cut the longboat loose! I want nothing that touched that water attached to my ship." "But, Captain, the boat—" The boatswain started. "Do it!" I roared, drawing my pistol. The boatswain didn't argue. With 2 swift hacks of an axe, the ropes were severed. The longboat, our trusty transport, fell back into the grey swell and drifted away into the mist. I watched it go, feeling a strange tightening in my gut. It felt like we were amputating a limb to stop gangrene from spreading. "Set a course due west," I ordered Silas, my voice rasping. "Full canvas. I don't care if the wind tears the masts down. Get us away from here." "Aye, Captain," Silas said, wiping slime from his coat. "And the men? They saw Miller taken." I looked at the huddled group of survivors. They were shaking. Thomas, the boy, was weeping silently, hugging his knees. "Give them double rations of rum," I said quietly, "and tell the rest of the crew it was a rogue wave, a shark, anything but the truth. Fear is a poison, Silas. If they think we are fighting ghosts, mutiny will follow before nightfall." I retreated to my cabin, slamming the heavy door and locking it. My hands were trembling, not from fear, I told myself, but from adrenaline. I poured a glass of brandy, swallowed it in one burn, and then poured another. Only then did I pull the leather-bound logbook from my coat. It was cold to the touch, damp. It smelled of that same sickly sweet decay that permeated the San Gabriel. I sat at my desk, the lantern swinging overhead with the motion of the ship as the Iron Maiden began to pick up speed. I opened the book. The pages were brittle, stained with water and other things. The earlier entries were mundane: weather reports, cargo manifests, disciplinary actions. Captain Cortez, the man whose eyeless corpse I had just left behind, had been a meticulous man. But as I turned the pages, the handwriting changed. It became jagged, frantic. The ink was pressed so hard into the paper it had torn through in places. October 3rd, we dredged it up near the Shadow Shoals. The idol. It is not gold nor stone. It is warm. The men claim it sings to them in their sleep. October 12th. The rats are gone. All of them. They jumped into the sea. I saw the cook's cat eating its own tail. The idol demands proximity. November 1st. It is not a statue. It is a cocoon. We were fools. We thought we were the masters of this vessel, but we are merely the larder. I slammed the book shut. My heart was hammering against my ribs. A cocoon. The black thing in the hold. It wasn't the monster. It was the hatchling and the captain. He had written that he swallowed the key. The key to what? The room where the idol was kept, or something else? A knock at my door made me jump. I covered the book with a map of the West Indies. "Enter!" I growled. Silas stepped in. He looked worse than I felt. His skin was grey, and he was clutching his left arm. "We have a problem, Alistair," he said, omitting my title. That was never a good sign. The crew? No, it's the boy, Thomas. Is he blabbing about monsters? I wish he were, Silas said grimly. He's in the sick bay. The surgeon says he's changing. I stood up, the chair scraping loudly against the floorboards. Show me. We descended into the bowels of the ship. The air grew stale and hot. The sick bay was a small, cramped space near the bow, smelling of vinegar and sawdust. The surgeon, a balding man named Pym, was standing over a hammock, holding a rag to his mouth. Captain, Pym mumbled, his eyes wide with terror. I've never seen the like. It ain't the pox, and it ain't the plague. I stepped forward and looked into the hammock. Thomas lay there, stripped to the waist. He was sweating profusely, but his skin was ice cold. But it was his chest that made me recoil. Where I had grabbed his shirt to pull him back from the rail during the storm, and where he had scrambled on the deck of the San Gabriel, black veins were spreading like a spiderweb under his pale skin. They pulsed in time with his heartbeat, and right in the center of his sternum, the flesh was darkening, hardening, turning into something that looked like the wood of the San Gabriel. Thomas opened his eyes. They were bloodshot. The pupils dilated so wide they were almost entirely black. "Captain," he wheezed, his voice sounded wet. "I can hear it." "Hear what, lad?" I asked, leaning closer despite every instinct telling me to run. "The bell," he whispered. "It's ringing. Can't you hear it? It's calling us back." I straightened up, looking at Pym. "Cut it out of him." "Sir?" Pym stammered. "The black flesh. Cut it out. Burn the wound." "It goes deep, Captain. It's wrapped around his ribs. If I cut, he'll die." "If you don't," Silas said from the doorway, his voice low, "we might all die." Suddenly the ship lurched violently to port. The lanterns swung wildly, casting erratic shadows. Above us I heard the shouting of men and the thunder of canvas snapping taut. "Captain, to the deck!" a voice screamed from the hatchway. I abandoned the boy and sprinted up the stairs, Silas at my heels. We burst onto the main deck into a scene of chaos. The fog had returned. It was thicker than before, a wall of white that swallowed the bow of the ship. But that wasn't what had terrified the crew. "Look!" the helmsman shouted, pointing off the starboard beam. I looked, and I felt the blood drain from my face. Drifting alongside us, matching our speed perfectly despite having no sails, was the San Gabriel. It was closer now, much closer. I could see the barnacles on the hull. I could smell the rot, and I could see the captain's cabin. The dead captain was no longer at the window. "Hard to port!" I screamed. "Get us away from her!" "The wheel won't turn," the helmsman cried, struggling with the spokes. "It's stuck fast." Then the sound began. Not the bell this time. It was a sound of wood splintering and groaning. Grappling hooks, rusty, ancient iron hooks, flew out of the fog from the San Gabriel's deck. They slammed into our railing, biting deep into the wood of the Iron Maiden. Ropes tightened. The two ships slammed together with a bone-jarring crash that knocked men off their feet. We weren't escaping. We were being boarded. And as I drew my cutlass, looking at the dark rail of the ghost ship, I realized the horrifying truth. We hadn't left the San Gabriel. We had merely invited it to dinner. "Repel boarders!" I bellowed, the steel of my blade singing as I pulled it free. "Fight for your souls, you dogs! Fight!" From the deck of the dead ship, shadows began to move. They weren't men. They were shambling, dripping shapes that looked like the crew that had been lost, but wrong, twisted, and leading them, stepping onto my rail with a jerky marionette motion, was Miller. The man we lost an hour ago. His eyes were gone, and he was smiling. There is a specific sound a musket ball makes when it strikes a man, a wet thud, followed by the sharp crack of bone. I have heard it 1,000 times. It is the sound of victory, or the sound of loss. But when I leveled my flintlock at Miller and pulled the trigger, there was no crack. There was no spray of crimson. The ball hit him square in the chest, punching a hole through his ragged shirt. He staggered back a step, the impact absorbing into him like a stone thrown into mud. He didn't scream. He didn't fall. He just tilted his head, his neck snapping with a sound like dry kindling, and kept coming. "Fire!" I screamed, discarding my pistol and gripping my cutlass with both hands. "Cut them down! Don't let them gain a foothold!" The deck of the Iron Maiden dissolved into a slaughterhouse. My crew, hardened men who would face a Royal Navy frigate without blinking, were faltering. How do you fight an enemy that does not fear death because it has already experienced it? The creatures that swarmed over the rail were a mockery of the human form. Some were the desiccated corpses of the Spanish crew, their skin like cured leather, moving with jerky, unnatural speed. Others were fresh horrors, shambling mounds of black kelp and muscle, vaguely shaped like men, dripping a thick, tar-like substance that hissed when it touched the deck. Miller lunged at me. His hands were no longer hands. His fingers had elongated into blackened claws, dripping with that same dark slime. I sidestepped his clumsy swipe and swung my cutlass in a wide arc, aiming for his neck. The blade bit deep, too deep. It didn't slice through flesh, it stuck. It felt like chopping into a waterlogged tree trunk. Miller gurgled, a wet bubbling sound, and swung his other arm, backhanding me across the face. The force of the blow was inhuman. It sent me skidding across the wet planks, tasting blood and loose teeth. My sword remained wedged in his neck. "Captain!" Silas roared. He was standing atop a crate near the mainmast, wielding a boarding axe in one hand and a torch in the other. He swung the torch at a Spanish corpse that was trying to bite the throat of our boatswain. The creature shrieked, a high, piercing sound that vibrated in my teeth and recoiled from the flame. "Fire!" Silas yelled, his eye wild. "They burn, Alistair, they burn!" I scrambled to my feet, my head spinning. Fire on a wooden ship is a captain's worst nightmare. It is a death sentence. But as I watched Miller pull my cutlass from his own neck with a sickening squelch, the wound knitting itself shut with black tendrils, I realized we had no choice. "Light the pitch barrels!" I ordered, spitting a mouthful of blood onto the deck. "Use the lanterns! Burn them back to hell!" The crew, seizing upon this glimmer of hope, rallied. Men grabbed lanterns from the hooks and smashed them against the boarders. Pools of oil ignited, casting chaotic, flickering shadows against the wall of fog. I drew my dirk, a poor substitute for a cutlass, but it was all I had, and snatched a fallen torch from the deck. Miller was closing in again, his empty sockets fixed on me. "Come on then, you traitorous dog," I snarled. He lunged. I ducked under his claw, thrusting the torch into his face. The effect was instantaneous. Miller didn't just catch fire, he erupted. The black slime coating his skin acted like accelerant. He thrashed wildly, screaming with a voice that wasn't his own, a chorus of whispers screaming in agony. He fell to the deck, writhing as the flames consumed the corruption. "The grappling hooks!" I shouted over the roar of the fire and the screams of the dying. "Cut us loose! We have to separate!" I sprinted toward the rail, where the rusty iron hooks of the San Gabriel had bitten into our hull. The ropes connecting them were thick, ancient hemp, slick with the black ichor. Two of my men were already there, hacking at the lines with hatchets. "Hurry!" I urged them. "It's not working, Captain!" one of them cried, panic rising in his voice. "Look!" I looked closely. The ropes weren't just tied. The black slime from the San Gabriel was traveling along the lines, pulsing like veins. Where the hooks had pierced the wood of the Iron Maiden, the corruption was spreading. The wood of my ship was turning black, soft and rotting before my eyes. The two ships weren't just locked together. They were fusing. "The ship," I whispered, horror dawning on me. "It's trying to eat us." Suddenly the deck beneath my feet buckled. A massive timber from the San Gabriel's bow smashed through our railing, splintering the wood like a matchstick. Through the breach, more of the black vine-like tendrils poured in, seeking not men, but the ship itself. They wrapped around the cannons, the mast, the very bones of the Maiden. "Retreat to the stern," Silas bellowed, hacking the arm off a monster that tried to grab him. "We can't hold the midship." We fell back, a ragged, bleeding line of men retreating toward the helm. The waist of the ship was now a battlefield of fire and shadow. The San Gabriel loomed over us, its tattered sails flapping like the wings of a giant carrion bird. I reached the quarterdeck, gasping for air. We had lost half the crew. The rest were wounded or on the verge of madness. "What do we do?" Silas asked, his chest heaving. "We can't cut the lines. We can't kill them all. And the fire is spreading to our rigging." I looked at the chaos. The maiden was dying. I could feel it in the soles of my boots. She was being digested. Then I remembered the logbook in my coat pocket. It was vibrating, a low, steady hum that I could feel against my ribs. I pulled it out. The leather cover was hot to the touch. "The captain," I muttered, my mind racing. "He said the idol demands proximity. He said he swallowed the key." "Alistair, this is no time for reading," Silas shouted as a burning figure stumbled toward the stairs. "Don't you see, Silas?" I looked at him, my eyes wide. "They aren't just attacking, they are searching. They want the book back, or they want what the book leads to." I looked at the San Gabriel. The dead captain was back at the window. He wasn't smiling anymore. He was pointing at the deck below us, at the hatch leading to the sickbay. "Thomas," I breathed. The realization hit me like a physical blow. The infection in the boy, the black mass in his chest. It wasn't just a disease, it was a beacon. "They aren't trying to eat the ship," I said, my voice cold. "They are trying to retrieve their kin." The deck exploded upward near the mainmast, but it wasn't a boarder. It was a massive tentacle from the hold of the San Gabriel, smashing through the planks. It didn't attack us. It snaked its way toward the forward hatch, toward the sickbay. "We have to get to the boy," I said, reloading my pistol with shaking hands. "Before they do." "Why?" Silas asked. "Let them take him. If that's what they want, let them have the cursed lad." "Because," I said, locking eyes with my quartermaster, "if that thing down there reunites with the source, I don't think there will be an ocean left to sail on." I grabbed a fresh cutlass from a fallen comrade. "Into the hold, Silas, into the dark." The descent into the belly of the Iron Maiden was a journey into a madman's throat. The air grew hotter with every step down the ladder, heavy with the stench of humid rot and that cloying, sickly sweet perfume of the San Gabriel. Above us, the sounds of battle, the clash of steel, the screams of men, the crackle of fire, faded into a muffled, distant thrumming. Down here, the ship was groaning. "Watch your footing," Silas hissed, holding his torch high. The light cast long, dancing shadows that seemed to grab at our ankles. The lower deck was flooded, not with seawater, but with a viscous black sludge that swirled around our boots. It was ankle-deep and warm, disturbingly so. It felt like walking through blood that had just been spilled. "The hull is breached?" Silas asked, kicking at a floating crate. "No," I replied, grimacing as the sludge coated my leather boots. "The ship isn't leaking, Silas. It's sweating." We moved toward the bow, toward the sickbay. The architecture of my ship, a vessel I knew better than the back of my own hand, was wrong. The bulkheads seemed to bulge outward, the wood soft and spongy to the touch. In the flickering torchlight, the grain of the wood looked less like timber and more like stretched muscle fibers. We passed the crew's quarters. Hammocks hung empty, swaying gently though there was no breeze. But it was the sound that stopped me. Scratch, scratch, scratch. It was coming from behind the door of the powder magazine. I raised my hand, signaling Silas to stop. I approached the door slowly, my cutlass raised. The wood was warped, the iron hinges rusted as if they had aged 100 years in an hour. "Is someone in there?" I called out. The scratching stopped. Then a voice, low, guttural. "Let us out, Captain. The dark is so warm. Let us share it." It was the voice of Cooper, our carpenter, but beneath his voice there was another sound, a wet, clicking noise, like a beetle skittering on stone. "Cooper!" Silas stepped forward. "Open the door, man!" "Don't!" I warned, grabbing Silas's shoulder. I'd looked at the bottom of the door. The black sludge was seeping out from under it, but it was moving against the flow of the water, crawling up the wood like a living stain. "That isn't Cooper anymore." We backed away, leaving the scratching behind. We had a mission: the boy. When we reached the narrow corridor leading to the sickbay, the torchlight revealed a nightmare. The passageway was choked with the black vines from the San Gabriel. They had smashed through the hull plating on the starboard side, weaving through the ribs of the ship like invasive roots. They pulsed with a rhythmic, bioluminescent blue light, illuminating the dark corridor with an underwater glow. And they were all moving in one direction, toward the sickbay door. "They're trying to get in," Silas whispered. "They are blocked," I noted. The heavy oak door of the sickbay was still closed, but the vines were hammering against it, testing the wood, seeking a crack. "We have to cut through," I said, gripping my cutlass. "On my mark, slash and move. Don't let them touch your skin." "Aye, Captain." "Now!" we charged. I hacked at the thickest vine blocking our path. The blade sliced through the rubbery outer skin, and the thing shrieked, a sound of escaping steam and pain. It recoiled, whipping wildly. I ducked, feeling the wind of it pass over my head, and severed it with a backhanded stroke. Black ichor sprayed the walls. Silas was a whirlwind of violence, his axe chopping through the tendrils with brutal efficiency. We carved a path through the writhing mass, slipping on the slime, breathing in the spores of the corruption. I reached the sickbay door and kicked it open. The scene inside froze me in the doorway. Pym, the surgeon, was dead. He had been pinned to the wall by a spike of black bone that had erupted from his own chest. His face was frozen in a mask of ecstatic terror, but it was Thomas who commanded the room. The boy was no longer lying in the hammock. He was floating, suspended in the center of the cramped room by a web of black veins that connected his spine to the ceiling and floor. He looked like a fly caught in a spider's larder. His chest had been torn open, but instead of organs, there was a cavity filled with swirling dark light, and in the center of that light, pulsing like a second heart, was a piece of jagged black stone. The idol, or rather, a shard of it. "He didn't just touch it," I whispered, the realization cold in my stomach. "He absorbed it." Thomas's head lolled forward. His eyes opened. They were entirely black, stars swirling in the void of his pupils. "Captain," he said. His voice echoed, sounding like it came from the bottom of a well. "You brought the key." I instinctively touched the logbook in my pocket. "The key?" "The book," Thomas said, his mouth not moving, the words forming directly in my mind. "The words bind the flesh binds the shadow opens the gate." Suddenly, the ship shook violently. The vines in the corridor outside roared. A massive section of the hull behind Thomas buckled. From the darkness of the breach, the great tentacle we had seen on the San Gabriel, the mother vine, slithered into the room. It was thick as a cannon barrel covered in weeping eyes. It ignored me. It ignored Silas. It went straight for the boy. It didn't want to kill him. It wanted to plug into him. "It's trying to connect," Silas yelled, backing away. "If that thing touches him, it completes the circuit," I finished, "and brings the rest of hell through to us." I looked at the boy. He was looking at me, tears of black oil streaming down his face. Beneath the alien possession, I saw the terrified 16-year-old kid from Bristol. "Kill me," Thomas whispered. This time it was his own voice, small, broken. "Please, Captain, before I let them in." I raised my pistol. My hand, usually steady as stone, trembled. This was my crewman, a boy I had pulled from the sea only yesterday. "I can't do it," Silas breathed, lowering his axe. The mother vine lunged, its tip opening like a flower of wet meat, reaching for the cavity in Thomas's chest. I didn't think. I couldn't afford to. "Forgive me, lad," I whispered. I didn't aim for his head. I aimed for the black stone pulsing in his chest. I pulled the trigger. The spark ignited the powder. The hammer fell. The roar of the pistol was deafening in the small space. The ball struck the black stone perfectly. For a second, there was absolute silence. No sound, no motion. The world turned grey. Then, the stone shattered. A shockwave of pure kinetic force blasted outward. It threw me backward into the corridor, slamming me against the wall. Silas was tossed like a rag doll. The mother vine shrieked, a sound that shattered the glass of the lantern, and recoiled, thrashing as if burned. Light, blinding white light, erupted from Thomas's body. The web holding him disintegrated. I lay on the floor, ears ringing, vision swimming. I looked up through the smoke. Thomas was on the floor. He wasn't moving. The black veins on his skin were receding, turning to grey ash. The hole in the hull was still there, but the mother vine had retreated, fleeing the light. I crawled over to him. I placed a hand on his neck. No pulse. "Is he—" Silas groaned, pulling himself up from a pile of debris. "He's gone," I said, my voice hollow. I looked at the shattered remains of the black stone in his chest cavity. It was dull now, lifeless. But as I watched, the smoke from the pistol shot didn't dissipate. It swirled, it gathered, it formed a shape above the boy's body, a spectral, translucent figure. It wasn't Thomas. It was the Spanish captain, Cortez. He looked at me, his eyeless sockets weeping light. He pointed a ghostly finger at the logbook in my pocket, and then at the open breach in the hull, where the dark ocean waited. "You have broken the vessel," the ghost whispered, the wind carrying his voice. "But the owner is coming, and he is very hungry." The ghost vanished, and from the breach in the hull, the sea began to pour in. Not black sludge this time, but cold, unforgiving salt water. "We're sinking," Silas said, stating the obvious with terrifying calm. I stood up, grabbing Thomas's body. I wouldn't leave him here, not after this. "To the boats," I ordered, hoisting the boy's corpse over my shoulder. "If any remain. A ship does not die quietly. She screams." As the water rushed into the breach in the hull, the Iron Maiden let out a sound like a dying leviathan. Timbers snapping, iron bolts popping like gunfire, the very spine of the keel grinding against the pressure of the deep. I carried Thomas's body over my shoulder. He was dead weight, limp and cooling rapidly, but I refused to let him slide into the black filth swirling around my knees. Silas was ahead of me, scrambling up the ladder to the gun deck, his torch sputtering as the water rose to lick at his boots. "Move, Silas, move!" I roared, the water now at my waist. It was freezing, a sharp contrast to the unnatural heat of the corruption moments before. We burst onto the gun deck, gasping for air. The ship was listing heavily to starboard, 30 degrees at least. The cannons, usually secured with thick ropes, were straining against their lashings. One broke loose as we watched, a 2-ton iron beast sliding across the deck, crushing a crate of shot before smashing through the hull on the lower side. "She's gutting herself," Silas yelled over the din of destruction. "Topside," I commanded, shifting the boy's weight. My shoulder burned, but a strange energy coursed through me. Ever since the explosion of the black stone, my veins felt like they were filled with lightning instead of blood. I wasn't exhausted, I was wired, vibrating with a frantic, terrifying vitality. We reached the main deck. It was a scene from the apocalypse. The fog had lifted slightly, just enough to reveal the carnage. Bodies, both human and otherwise, littered the planks. The fire we had started to hold back the creatures had caught the rigging. The mainsail was a sheet of flame, casting a hellish orange glow over the water. But the San Gabriel was gone. The grappling hooks had torn free when my ship began to list, taking chunks of our railing with them. The ghost ship had drifted back into the mist, disappearing as silently as it had arrived, leaving us to drown in its wake. "To the pinnace!" I shouted. The longboat was gone, cut loose earlier. The jolly boat was smashed by falling debris. The pinnace, a smaller vessel mounted near the stern, was our only hope. A handful of survivors were already there, 5 men. Their faces masks of soot and blood. They were struggling with the davits, trying to lower the boat into the churning water. "Captain!" one of them cried, seeing me. "We thought you were dead!" "Not yet," I grunted, laying Thomas's body gently into the bottom of the boat. "Why are we bringing the corpse?" A sailor named Hatcher spat, panic making him bold. "He's dead weight! Leave him!" I turned to Hatcher. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't draw my weapon. I simply looked at him. And in that moment I felt the change. My vision sharpened. I could see the pulse beating in Hatcher's neck. I could hear the blood rushing in his veins. The world seemed to slow down. I stepped forward, grabbing Hatcher by the collar with one hand. I lifted him off his feet with zero effort. "He stays," I said, my voice vibrating with a harmonic undertone that wasn't human. "You can swim if you prefer." Hatcher's eyes went wide, terrified not by the sinking ship, but by me. Aye, Captain." I dropped him. "Lower away. Now!" We scrambled into the boat. The Maiden gave a violent lurch. The stern rose high into the air, the burning sails illuminating the black water below. We hit the sea with a splash, unhooking the falls frantically. "Row!" Silas bellowed. "Get us clear of the suction!" We pulled at the oars like madmen. The muscles in my back screamed, but I didn't stop. We put 10 yards, 20 yards, 50 yards between us and the dying ship. Then we stopped. We rested on our oars and watched. The Iron Maiden slid beneath the waves. The fire on the masts hissed as it touched the ocean, extinguishing in a cloud of steam. The bow pointed toward the sky for a brief, defiant moment, and then she was gone. Silence rushed back in to fill the void, just the lap of waves against the wood of our small boat. I sat in the stern, staring at the patch of bubbling water where my life's work had vanished. I felt a hollow ache in my chest, a grief so profound it threatened to paralyze me. A captain is married to the sea, but his ship is his bride. I was a widower now. "What now, Captain?" Silas asked softly, breaking the spell. He was wrapping a bandage around a deep gash on his arm. I looked at the horizon. The sun was beginning to rise, bleeding a pale grey light into the sky. We were 7 men in a 20-foot boat, with no water, little food, and a dead boy at our feet. "We head west," I said, my voice raspy, "toward the Tortugas." "That's 3 weeks of rowing," Hatcher muttered. "We'll die of thirst in 3 days." "We will not die," I said firmly. I looked down at my hands. They were stained with soot and dried blood, but as the first light of dawn hit them, I saw it. Faint grey lines were tracing themselves under the skin of my palms, like veins of silver. They pulsed faintly. I closed my fist, and I felt it again. The hum. The same hum that had come from the logbook. The same hum that had come from the stone in Thomas's chest. I reached into my coat pocket. The logbook was there, wet, but intact. But it wasn't vibrating anymore. It was cold, dead. The realization hit me. The stone hadn't just exploded, it had discharged. Energy cannot be created or destroyed, only transferred. I looked at Thomas's body. Then I looked at the vast, empty ocean. I could hear the ocean, not just the waves. I could hear things, deep things, whales singing miles beneath us, the shifting of the currents. And something else, a heartbeat, a massive, slow heartbeat coming from the deep. Thump, thump. "Captain?" Silas was watching me with concern. "Your eyes. What about them?" "They're different. They're grey, like the fog." I looked away, staring into the water. My reflection stared back. Silas was right. My eyes, once dark brown, were now the colour of a storm cloud. And in the depths of my pupils, something was swirling. "The stone is gone, Silas," I whispered so only he could hear. "But the door is still open." I clenched my fist, and the water around the boat rippled, obeying my anger. "And I think I am the key now. The sun is not a celestial body. It is a hammer." For 3 days, it had beaten against the open wound of the ocean, turning the air into a shimmering kiln. There is no shade in a 20-foot pinnace. There is nowhere to hide. We were 7 men roasting in our own clothes, the salt drying on our skin until every movement felt like sandpaper grinding against raw flesh. Our water was gone. The small cask we had managed to salvage had been smashed during the launch, leaking its precious contents into the bilge. We had nothing but the humidity of the night to wet our cracked lips. But while my men withered, their eyes sinking into their skulls and their tongues swelling like slugs in their mouths, I felt different. I was thirsty, yes, but it was a distant sensation, like a memory of thirst, rather than the physical reality of it. The burning sun did not blister my skin, it seemed to be absorbed by it. And the hum, that low, vibrating frequency I had felt in the stone, was now a constant companion, resonating in the marrow of my bones. "He's staring at me," Hatcher croaked. His voice was a dry rattle. He was huddled in the bow, clutching a rusty belaying pin. "Who, Hatcher?" Silas asked. Silas was faring better than the others, but his face was gaunt, his one good eye bloodshot. "The boy." Hatcher pointed a trembling finger at Thomas's body lying in the bottom of the boat. "He's staring." I looked down at Thomas. I'd closed his eyes 3 days ago, but the motion of the boat often jarred them open. Hatcher was right, in a sense. The boy's dead eyes, now cloudy and flat, seemed fixed on the sky. But there was something else, something impossible. "He doesn't smell," I said quietly. The men fell silent. In this heat, a corpse should have bloated and burst by now. The stench should have been unbearable, forcing us to throw him overboard simply to breathe. But Thomas looked exactly as he had the moment he died. His skin was pale, cool to the touch. No flies gathered, no rot set in. It was as if time itself had decided to skip over him. "It's unnatural," whispered a sailor named Griggs. He was a devout man, clutching a wooden cross that was splintering in his grip. "He's cursed. We are carrying a Jonah." "We are keeping him," I said, my voice cutting through the heat haze. It was deeper now, resonant. "He died saving us from the San Gabriel. We will give him a Christian burial on land." "Land?" Hatcher laughed, a sound like tearing canvas. "There is no land, Captain. There is only blue hell. We are going to die here, and that thing is watching us do it." Hatcher stood up, swaying dangerously. The boat rocked. "I say we dump him. Maybe the sea will give us rain if we give it the boy." "Sit down, Hatcher," I warned. "No," Hatcher lunged, not at me, but at the corpse. He grabbed Thomas by the shirt, trying to heave him toward the gunwale. "Stop him!" Silas shouted, but he was too weak to move fast. I reached out. I didn't mean to shout. I didn't mean to strike him. I simply willed him to stop. I felt a surge of cold pressure in my chest, traveling down my arm and out of my palm. Stop! The ocean around the boat erupted. It wasn't a wave. It was a spike of water, solid and hard as glass, that shot up from the surface and slammed into the side of the boat right next to Hatcher. The impact threw the boat sideways. Hatcher lost his footing and fell backward, dropping Thomas. The men screamed, clinging to the seats. I stared at my hand. The silver veins beneath my skin were glowing, a faint, bioluminescent pulse visible even in the bright sunlight. The water settled. The ocean was calm again. Hatcher lay on the floorboards, staring at me with pure, unadulterated horror. What are you?" I lowered my hand, hiding the glow in the folds of my coat. My heart was racing, but not from exertion. It was the thrill. The power was intoxicating. "I am your captain," I said, my voice steady, "and you will not touch him again." Silence reigned for an hour. The men were too terrified of me to speak. But fear does not quench thirst. As evening approached, the sky turned a bruised purple. The wind died completely. We were becalmed. The silence of the ocean was total. Then I heard it again. The heartbeat. Thump, thump. It was louder this time, closer, and it was accompanied by a new sound. The sound of water being displaced by something massive. "Shark!" Griggs hissed, pointing off the starboard beam. A fin cut the water. It was black, ragged, and huge. Then another, and another. Within moments, the boat was surrounded. There were dozens of them, great white sharks, tiger sharks, species I didn't even recognize. But they weren't attacking. They weren't bumping the hull or thrashing in a feeding frenzy. They were circling, slowly, counterclockwise, a perfect, silent spiral. "They're waiting for us to die," Silas whispered, gripping his axe. I leaned over the side, staring into the dark water. The nearest shark, a massive beast with scars along its dorsal fin, broke the surface. It didn't look at Hatcher. It didn't look at Silas. It looked at me. Its black eye rolled back, and for a second I felt a connection, a primitive, cold intelligence brushing against my mind. It wasn't hunger. It was recognition. The key. The ocean whispered in my head. The vessel. I pulled my hand back, revulsion warring with fascination. "They aren't waiting for us to die, Silas. Then what are they doing?" I looked at the perfectly preserved corpse of Thomas, and then at the glowing veins in my own hands. "They are escorting us." As the sun finally dipped below the horizon, plunging us into darkness, the water around the boat began to glow, not from the moon, but from below. Thousands of phosphorescent creatures rose from the deep, creating a highway of light, pointing due west. "Grab the oars," I ordered, feeling the pull of the current guiding us. "The tide is with us." We rowed into the night, guided by monsters, carrying the dead, with a captain who was no longer entirely human. The glowing highway of the deep faded with the sunrise, leaving us adrift in a sea that looked deceptively ordinary. But the sharks did not leave. They sank into the indigo depths, a silent vanguard patrolling the perimeter of our existence. "Land!" Hatcher's voice cracked, sounding more like a sob than a shout. I squinted against the glare. There, on the horizon, was a jagged smudge of grey and green. It wasn't the welcoming sandy shores of Tortuga or the lush embrace of Hispaniola. It was an ugly thing, a volcanic tooth jutting out of the ocean, ringed by white foam where the waves battered themselves against sharp reefs. "Pull!" I ordered, my voice grating like stones. "Put your backs into it." We rowed with the desperate energy of dying men. As we drew closer, the island revealed its hostility. There were no beaches, only cliffs of black basalt and narrow rocky inlets. The vegetation was sparse, clinging to the rock face like desperate fingers. We found a break in the reef, a narrow channel that led to a small, pebble-strewn cove. The surf was rough. "Watch the swell!" Silas yelled from the bow. A wave picked up our small craft and hurled us forward. Wood crunched against stone. The pinnace splintered. We were thrown into the churning wash, scrambling over slick rocks, coughing up salt water, dragging our broken bodies onto the shore. I didn't scramble for safety. My first instinct, driven by that cold, alien compulsion in my blood, was for the boy. I waded back into the surf, the current tugging at my legs with the strength of a draft horse. I found Thomas's body wedged between two boulders. I grabbed his collar and hauled him up. He was heavy. Impossibly heavy. It took all my newfound strength to drag him onto the dry stones. I collapsed beside him, gasping. Silas crawled over, coughing water. "We made it," Silas wheezed. "God help us, we made it." "Check the men," I commanded, staring at the sky. No birds. That was the first thing I noticed. An island in this latitude should be teeming with gulls, pelicans, frigates. But the sky was empty. The silence was absolute, save for the crashing of the waves. We had lost 2 men in the landing. Griggs was gone, pulled under by the undertow, or perhaps taken by the sharks that waited just beyond the reef. 5 of us remained. Me, Silas, Hatcher, and 2 others, runs of the mill sailors named Cole and Webb. "Water," Hatcher moaned. "I need fresh water." We stumbled inland, leaving Thomas's body on the high water mark. The island was a labyrinth of sharp volcanic rock. We found a trickle of water seeping from a fissure in a cliff face. It tasted metallic, like licking a rusty spoon, but it was fresh. We drank until our bellies ached. Night fell quickly, the shadows stretching out from the rocks like grasping claws. We huddled together in a small cave near the beach, shivering as the temperature dropped. "We need a fire," Cole whispered. "No dry wood," Silas replied. "Everything here is soaked in salt." I sat apart from them, near the cave entrance, watching the beach. I could see the dark shape of Thomas's body in the moonlight. "Captain," Silas moved to sit beside me. He spoke low. "We need to talk about the boy." "He gets a burial at dawn," I said. "Deep in the rock." "It's not that," Silas hesitated. "When we dragged the boat up, I touched his arm. It was hard, Alistair, like stone." I looked at my own hand. The silver veins were dormant now, but I could feel the hum beneath my skin, resonating with something on this island. "I'm going to check on him," I said, standing up. I walked down to the beach. The moon was full, casting a stark white light over the cove. I knelt beside Thomas. Silas was right. The boy's skin had lost the pliability of flesh. I tapped his cheek. It made a sound like striking marble. I unbuttoned his shirt to look at the chest wound, the hole where I had shot the black stone. It was gone. The skin had knitted itself together perfectly. No scar, no indentation, just smooth, pale, stone-hard skin. And then I saw it. Around his body, in a perfect circle in the sand, lay dead crabs, dozens of them. They had crawled out of the sea, approached the boy, and simply died. "He's a blight," I whispered to the wind. "A siphon." Suddenly Thomas's mouth opened. I recoiled, hand going to the hilt of my cutlass. A sound came out, not a voice, not a breath. It was a sound like tuning a violin, a high, discordant screech that grated on the bone. Scree! And then from the cliffs above came an answer. Scree! I spun around, looking up at the jagged silhouette of the island's peak. "Captain!" Hatcher screamed from the cave. I sprinted back, sand flying under my boots. I burst into the cave to find the men backed against the wall, brandishing stones and driftwood. "What is it?" I roared. "Look!" Hatcher pointed at the floor of the cave. The ground was moving. Thousands of black beetles, each the size of a man's hand, were pouring out of the fissures in the rock. But they weren't attacking. They were marching. A river of chitin and legs flowing out of the cave and down toward the beach. Toward Thomas. "They are feeding him," Silas realized, horror in his voice, "or worshipping him." "We are leaving," I said. "Leaving?" Cole cried. "The boat is smashed. The sharks are waiting. We can't leave." "We cannot stay in this cave," I clarified. "Higher ground, the peak. Whatever is answering him is up there." "Answering him?" Silas looked at me sharply. "You mean there's more of them?" "I don't think we've found a desert island, Silas," I said, watching the carpet of beetles flow past my boots, ignoring the living to reach the dead. "I think we've found the garden, where the San Gabriel grew its fruit." I grabbed a piece of driftwood. "Move, up the cliff. If you value your souls, do not touch the insects." We began the climb in the dark, ascending the spine of the dead volcano. Below us, on the beach, the screeching grew louder. The beetles were swarming over Thomas's body, covering him in a living shroud. And as we climbed, I felt the island waking up under my feet. The hum in my blood grew violent, painful. It wasn't just a signal anymore. It was a command. "Come!" The rock whispered to my bones. "Come home!" I looked at my hand. The silver veins were burning bright enough to light the path. "Captain," Silas said, seeing my hand, "you're glowing." "I know," I said, gripping the rock until it crumbled in my unnatural grip. "I am the lantern now, Silas. Pray I don't lead us off a cliff." We reached the summit as the moon hit its zenith, and there, in the center of the crater, we saw it. It wasn't a volcano, it was a temple. Ancient cyclopean ruins made of the same black, oily stone as the idol. And in the center of the ruins stood a massive archway, filled not with air, but with a swirling vertical pool of water that defied gravity. And standing in front of the gate, waiting for us, was a figure. He wore the tattered rags of a Spanish sailor, but his head was gone, replaced by a cluster of writhing black coral. He raised a hand, pointing directly at me. "Welcome, Key," the voice echoed in my skull. "The lock has been waiting." The figure standing before the impossible wall of vertical water was a blasphemy against nature. It wore the rags of a man, but its biology was that of the abyss. The cluster of black coral that replaced its head twitched, the polyps opening and closing like hundreds of tiny, wet mouths. It had no eyes, yet I felt its gaze pinning me to the basalt floor of the crater. "What are you?" I demanded, my voice echoing off the ruins. My hand hovered over my cutlass, though I knew steel would be as useless here as a prayer. "We are the Echo," the voice resonated in my skull, bypassing my ears entirely. It tasted like copper on my tongue. "We are the gardeners. And you, Alistair Blackwood, are the seed that took root." The silver veins in my hands flared, casting a spectral light on the dark stone. The hum in my bones reached a fever pitch, syncing with the pulsing rhythm of the water gate. I realized with a sick lurch of my stomach that the gate wasn't just a portal, it was an organ, and I was the blood it was waiting for. "I am no seed," I snarled, stepping forward to shield Silas. "I am a captain of the Royal Navy, and I demand you let us pass." The creature didn't move, but a sound like grinding stones emitted from its chest. Laughter. "There is no passing, only becoming. The stone you destroyed was a chrysalis. You shattered the shell, but you absorbed the passenger. It is inside you now, weaving, changing, preparing." "He's mad," Hatcher whispered, his eyes wide and glassy. He was staring at the swirling water in the archway. "It's a door. It's a way off this rock." "Hatcher, stay back," I warned. But fear had broken Hatcher's mind. He saw salvation in the madness. He dropped his driftwood club and sprinted toward the archway, screaming, "I'm going home! You hear me? I'm going home!" He ran past the coral-headed figure. The creature didn't stop him. It merely watched. Hatcher hit the wall of water. He didn't pass through. He didn't splash. He stopped, suspended. The water gripped him. It wrapped around his limbs like translucent serpents. We watched in horror as Hatcher's body was lifted into the center of the vortex. He screamed, but the sound was muffled, wet. Then the water turned red. In a split second he was unmade, dissolved into a cloud of pink mist and bone fragments that the gate absorbed greedily. The gate pulsed brighter. "The lock accepts the offering of flesh," the creature intoned, "but it requires the key to open." The creature raised a hand, a claw of blackened bone, and pointed at me. "Step forward, carrier. The Deep One awaits his tribute." "I will rot on this rock before I open that door," I said, drawing my cutlass. The blade looked pathetic against the backdrop of ancient cosmic horror. "Resistance is a human conceit," the creature replied. "If the key will not turn itself, we shall force it." The creature slammed its hand onto the ground. The black stone of the temple floor rippled like liquid. From the cracks, shapes began to rise, not more coral creatures, but shadows. Silhouettes of men cut from the fabric of the night, armed with jagged blades of obsidian. "Defend yourselves," I roared. Silas, Cole, and Webb formed a circle back-to-back with me. The shadows lunged. I parried a strike from an obsidian blade. The impact jarred my arm, but my new strength held. I riposted, slicing through the shadow's torso. My blade passed through smoke, but the silver energy in my veins flared, traveling down the steel. When the glowing metal touched the shadow, the entity shrieked and evaporated. "Use the fire!" I yelled to my men, realizing my own energy was a weapon. "Stay close to me!" But they had no fire. They only had mortal strength. I heard a gurgle behind me. I spun around to see Webb lifted into the air by a shadow. A blade of dark glass was buried in his gut. He looked at me, blood bubbling from his lips, and then was tossed aside like a broken doll. "Webb!" Silas cried, swinging his axe wildly. We were losing. There were too many of them. And then the sound from the beach arrived. Scream! The chittering was deafening now. It wasn't just below us. It was at the edge of the crater. The fighting stopped. Even the shadow creatures paused. Over the lip of the crater, a black tide poured in. Millions of beetles. They flowed over the rocks like oil, but they weren't swarming us. They were carrying something. They bore a palanquin made of their own bodies, a shifting, living throne. And upon it lay Thomas. But he was no longer the marble statue I had left on the beach. The beetles had eaten away his clothes. They had eaten away the softness. He was now a grotesque mosaic of stone flesh and insect carapace, and where his chest had been, where the stone had once been, there was a hole, a gaping hollow void that whistled in the wind. The coral-headed priest bowed. "The vessel has arrived," it said. "The key is stubborn, but the vessel is empty." The beetles surged forward, carrying Thomas toward me. The boy's eyes snapped open. They were glowing with the same blue light as the gate. "Captain," Thomas spoke, but his voice was a multitude. It was the voice of the San Gabriel, the voice of the ocean. "You hold the spark. I am the tinder. Give it back." I understood then. They didn't just want me to walk into the gate. They wanted to extract the energy I had absorbed, the passenger, and put it into Thomas. They wanted to resurrect the idol in a body that was already dead, a body that couldn't resist. If I refused, they would kill Silas and Cole. If I agreed, I would unleash a god. The beetles swarmed around my legs, pinning me in place. The dead boy drifted closer, floating upright now, the hole in his chest pulsating, pulling at the energy in my blood like a magnet. I felt my strength draining, the silver veins in my skin drifting toward him like smoke. I looked at Silas. He was bleeding, exhausted, holding his axe with trembling hands. "Silas!" I gritted out, fighting the magnetic pull of the boy. "Run! I'm not leaving you, Alistair. Run!" I bellowed, my voice cracking the stone beneath my feet. "This isn't a fight we can win with steel." I looked at the water gate. I looked at the boy, and I made a choice. I wouldn't give them the key, and I wouldn't let them have the vessel. I dropped my cutlass. I grabbed the dead boy's shoulders with both hands. The beetles bit at my flesh, tearing my coat, but I ignored them. I let the energy flow, not a trickle, all of it. I didn't try to pull it back. I pushed. I poured every ounce of the alien power, every volt of the hum, directly into the void in Thomas's chest. "You want the light?" I screamed, my skin burning as the silver veins turned blinding white. "Take it!" the coral priest shrieked. "No! Too much! You will break the vessel!" "That's the plan," I roared. Thomas's stone body began to crack. Beams of pure, uncontrolled energy shot out of his eyes, his mouth, the fissures in his skin. The beetles making up his throne incinerated instantly. The feedback loop hit the gate. The water vortex destabilized, turning from blue to a violent, angry red. The gravity holding it upright failed. With a sound like the sky tearing apart, the gate collapsed. Calculated tons of water, no longer held by magic, crashed down onto the temple. "Hold your breath," was the last thing I shouted before the deluge hit us, sweeping away the priest, the shadows, the boy, and the crew into a swirling maelstrom of destruction. I woke to the taste of copper and the sensation of sharp stones digging into my back. My lungs burned as I retched, coughing up water that tasted not of salt, but of stale metallic blood. I was lying on the beach, but it was not the beach we had landed on. The black volcanic sand was gone, replaced by a grey, powdery ash that coated everything like snow. The ocean was calm, unnervingly so. The water was no longer the deep, vibrant blue of the Caribbean. It was black, oily, opaque. It lapped against the shore with a sluggish, rhythmic sludge, devoid of foam or spray. I tried to sit up, and a scream of agony tore through my throat. I looked at my right arm, the arm I had used to pump the energy into Thomas. It was ruined. The sleeve of my coat was burned away. The skin from my fingertips to my elbow was charred black, cracked like cooling lava. It didn't bleed. It didn't look like flesh anymore. It looked like the obsidian blades the shadow creatures had wielded. I tried to move my fingers. They twitched, stiff and alien, accompanied by the sound of grinding stone. "Silas?" I croaked. My voice was a wreck, barely a whisper. "Cole?" Silence answered me. The screeching of the beetles was gone. The wind was gone. The sky above was a bruised, sickly violet, devoid of sun or stars. It was a twilight that felt eternal. I forced myself to stand. My balance was off, my center of gravity shifted by the dead weight of my stone arm. I stumbled up the beach, searching the debris line. I found pieces of the temple ruins washed ashore. I found the shattered remains of the insect palanquin. And then, near a cluster of jagged rocks, I found a boot. I followed the trail of disturbed ash. Silas was sitting behind a boulder, his knees pulled to his chest. He was rocking back and forth, mumbling to himself. "Silas," I said, reaching out with my good hand. He flinched violently, scrambling backward until his back hit the rock. He looked up at me, and my heart turned to ice. Silas's left eye, the good one, was gone. In its place was a smooth patch of skin, as if the eye had never existed. His mouth was fused shut at the corners, the skin growing over his lips. "Mph, mph." He tried to speak, panic wild in his remaining features. "Gods above," I whispered. The chaotic energy of the collapsing gate hadn't just destroyed, it had rewritten, it had scrambled his biology. I drew my dirk, miraculously still in my belt, and knelt beside him. "Hold still, Silas, I'm going to cut the skin. You need to breathe." He nodded frantically, tears streaming down his face. With a steady hand, I sliced the thin membrane of skin sealing his mouth. He gasped, sucking in air, spitting blood. "Captain," he wheezed, "the water, it's not water, it's memories. It's liquid time. I saw my mother drowning in it. I saw myself dying 100 times. "We are alive, Silas," I said, hauling him up. "That is the only time that matters." "Where are we?" he asked, looking at the violet sky. "Is this hell?" "If it is, we'll conquer it," I lied. I had no idea where we were. The stars were wrong. The horizon was too close, curving upward slightly as if we were inside a bowl. "Cole, Webb, gone," Silas said. "I saw Cole hit the water when the wave came down. He didn't sink, he dissolved, like sugar in hot tea." We were alone. Two broken men on an island of ash at the end of the world. I walked to the water's edge. I needed to wash the ash from my face, to think. I knelt and dipped my good hand into the black ocean. It was freezing, cold enough to burn. But as the ripples spread out from my touch, something happened. The water began to glow. A deep, spectral green light rose from the depths. And then the ocean began to boil, not with heat, but with motion. Something was rising. "Captain, get back!" Silas warned, clutching his axe. A massive shape broke the surface 100 yards out. Water cascaded off rotting timbers. A mast pierced the violet sky, followed by another. Tattered black sails, dripping with slime, caught a wind that didn't exist. It wasn't the San Gabriel. It was the Iron Maiden. She rose from the black depths, groaning as the water drained from her scuppers. But she wasn't the ship I had lost. She was changed. The wood was black as soot. The figurehead, once a woman in armor, was now a screaming banshee carved of obsidian. Green fire flickered in the lanterns. She didn't float on the water. She hovered inches above it, suspended by a mist of ghost light, and she was moving toward us. She drifted until her bow loomed over the beach. A gangplank, made of bleached bone and driftwood, extended from the rail, landing at my feet with a heavy thud. There was no crew on deck, no helmsman at the wheel. The ship was empty. And yet I could feel her. The hum in my blood, the connection I thought I had expelled, flared to life in my blackened arm. It resonated with the keel of the ship. "Welcome home," the ship whispered in the marrow of my bones. I looked at Silas. He was trembling, staring at the ghost ship with awe and terror. Is that our ship?" he asked. "No," I said, stepping onto the bone gangplank. The wood felt warm under my boots. "The Iron Maiden died. This is her ghost, and ghosts need a master." I turned to Silas, extending my obsidian hand. "Are you coming, quartermaster? We have an ocean to navigate, and I believe we just acquired the only vessel capable of sailing it." Silas looked at the desolate island, then at the nightmare ship. He took my hand. "Aye, Captain," he whispered, "to the ends of the earth." "No, Silas," I said, looking at the violet sky as I boarded my new command. "We are already past the ends of the earth. Now we sail into the void." I stepped onto the deck, and the ship shivered beneath my boots. It was not the creaking of timber settling in the water, nor the groan of stress against the rivets. It was a purr, a deep sub-bass vibration that traveled up through the soles of my feet and resonated in the hollow cavity of my chest. The deck of the Iron Maiden had changed. The planks were no longer oak. They were black, petrified wood, veined with a faint, pulsing phosphorescence. The railing was bone. Huge, curved ribs of some leviathan fused together to form the bulwark. "It's cold," Silas whispered, hugging his tattered coat around himself. "It's colder than the grave." He was right. The air aboard the ship was freezing, a biting chill that seemed to ignore fabric and skin, gnawing directly at the soul. But to me, with my arm of charred obsidian and my blood singing with the hum of the destroyed gate, it felt like a fever breaking. It felt like power. I walked to the helm. The wheel was huge, crafted from iron and black glass. I reached out with my ruined hand. The moment my obsidian fingers brushed the wheel, the world tilted. I didn't just hold the wheel, I became the ship. My consciousness expanded, rushing through the keel, the masts, the rigging. I could feel the water lapping against the hull as if it were touching my own skin. I could feel the empty hold like an ache in my belly. I could feel the wind, or the lack of it, against the sails, and I felt the hunger. It was a ravenous, gaping maw at the center of the ship's being. It didn't want coal. It didn't want wind. "Feed me," the ship whispered in my mind, a chorus of creaking wood and snapping rope. "Silas," I said, my voice sounding like two stones grinding together. "Go below. Check the galley. Check the magazine. Tell me what we are carrying." Silas hesitated, his one good eye darting around the shadows. "And if I find them, the crew—" "The crew is gone, Silas," I said, gripping the wheel tighter. The green lanterns flared brighter in response. "We are the crew. Now go." He nodded and vanished down the hatchway. I stood alone at the helm of a dead ship in a dead ocean under a violet sky. I looked at the tattered black sails. They hung limp in the still air. "You don't need wind, do you?" I murmured. I closed my eyes and focused on the connection. The silver veins in my good hand glowed. The obsidian arm pulsed. I visualized the ship moving. I poured my will into the iron wheel. "Move!" The response was immediate. The green fire in the lanterns roared, turning from a flicker to a blaze. The sails didn't billow out. They stiffened, catching a spectral current that wasn't there. The ship lurched forward, not with the slow acceleration of a sailing vessel, but with the sudden, jerking speed of a predator lunging. We cut through the black sludge of the water, leaving a wake of neon green foam. We were sailing fast, faster than any frigate I had ever commanded, and there wasn't a breath of wind. Silas burst onto the deck a moment later, pale as a sheet. "Captain, you need to see this." "I am steering, Silas," I shouted over the rushing noise of the water. "You aren't steering anything," he yelled back. "Come look at the furnace. There is no galley, Alistair. There is only the furnace." I locked the wheel. It stayed in place as if held by a giant hand, and followed him. We descended. The familiar layout of my ship was gone. The corridors were twisted, the angles wrong. It was like walking inside the ribcage of a beast. We reached the area that used to be the cargo hold. In the center of the cavernous space, suspended by heavy chains that disappeared into the shadows above, was a massive iron grate. Inside it burned a fire that gave off no heat, only a blinding, cold green light. But it wasn't burning wood. "Look," Silas pointed. The fire was swirling, forming shapes, faces. I recognized them. Hatcher, Webb, the men we had lost on the island. Their spectral faces screamed silently in the flames, swirling in an eternal torment, providing the energy that drove the ship. "It burns souls," Silas whispered, revulsion thick in his voice. "Our ship is an engine of damnation. It utilizes the available resources," I said coldly. I felt a pang of horror, yes, but it was distant. The maiden's pragmatism was bleeding into me. They were dead anyway, Silas. Now they serve a purpose. "A purpose?" Silas backed away from me. "To what end? Where are we going?" "To the surface," I said, turning back to the stairs. "To the world of the living. If this ship can sail through hell, it can sail us home." I returned to the helm. We were tearing across the black ocean now. The violet sky remained unchanged. No stars to guide us. I navigated by instinct, following a pull in my gut that felt like magnetic north. Then I saw it. On the horizon, a light. Not the green fire of our lanterns, but a warm yellow light. "A ship!" Silas cried, joining me on the quarterdeck. "A real ship!" I peered through the gloom. It was indeed a ship, a massive three-masted galleon drifting aimlessly. But as we drew closer, the details became wrong. The wood was rotten, ancient, the sails were moss, and it was flying a flag I didn't recognize. A golden lion on a field of blue. "That's a 16th century rig," I noted. "That ship should have rotted away 100 years ago." As the Iron Maiden approached, the hunger in the keel spiked. It was a physical pain, a cramping in my stomach. The ship didn't just want to sail, it wanted to hunt. "Prey!" the ship hissed in my mind. The Maiden swerved, ignoring my hand on the wheel. The bone railings on the port side shifted, sharpening like teeth. "Captain, we're on a collision course," Silas yelled. "I can't turn her." I strained against the wheel. My obsidian arm locked. The ship was overriding me. We slammed into the drifting galleon. But there was no crash, no splintering of wood. The Iron Maiden passed through the other ship. As we phased through the rotting hull of the stranger, I saw them, the crew of the galleon. They were ghosts, trapped in a loop of their final moments, playing cards, fighting, dying of scurvy. And as we passed through them, the green fire of the Maiden flared white. I felt a rush of energy, pure, intoxicating vitality, flood into me. The ship was feeding. It was stripping the residual energy, the memories, the very essence of the ghost ship as we passed through it. We emerged on the other side. Behind us, the golden galleon dissolved into grey ash and collapsed into the sea. The Maiden purred, the hunger satiated for the moment. The speed increased, the damage to my own body, the exhaustion, the pain, vanished. I looked at my hands. The silver veins were glowing so brightly they illuminated the deck. "We aren't sailing home, are we?" Silas asked quietly, watching the galleon fade into nothingness. "I don't know, Silas," I said, feeling the raw power coursing through the helm. "But in this ocean, we are not the prey. We are the shark." I looked ahead into the eternal twilight. Let's find the next meal. Time in this place was not measured in hours or watches, but in feedings. We had consumed 3 more vessels since the Spanish galleon. A French corvette from the Napoleonic Wars, trapped in a loop of cannon fire, a Viking longship drifting in a fog of ice, and a modern steel-hulled trawler that tasted of diesel and confusion. With every meal, the Iron Maiden grew stronger. The bone railing thickened, curving inward like a ribcage protecting its heart. The sails repaired themselves, turning from tattered rags into seamless sheets of shadow cloth, and I was becoming less of a man and more of a component. My obsidian arm had begun to fuse with the wheel. I could detach it, but it required an act of will that left me breathless and aching. "We are charting a graveyard," Silas murmured, leaning over the new map table. The table wasn't wood. It was a slab of translucent cartilage that had grown out of the deck. On it, glowing green dots marked the locations of the drifters, the ghost ships. "It is not random," I said, tracing a line of light with my black finger. "Look at the currents, the debris. Everything is drifting toward the center. The center of what?" "The drain," I replied, pointing to a swirling vortex of darkness on the far edge of the cartilage map. "Whatever this ocean is, it flows down, and we are sailing against the current." Suddenly, the ship shuddered, not the purr of hunger this time, but a spasm, a warning. The green fire in the lanterns dimmed, then flared violet. "Danger," the ship whispered in my mind. The voice was no longer a hiss, it was a roar of grinding metal. "Something is out there," I said, spinning the wheel. "Hard to starboard. Get the cannons ready." "Cannons?" Silas looked at me wildly. "We have no powder. We have no shot." "The ship provides," I bellowed. As if in answer, the gun ports slammed open on their own. The iron cannons, now fused with the same bone-like growth as the railing, shifted. They didn't need powder. They drew from the furnace. Green light gathered in their maws, crackling with the screams of the consumed souls. The water off our port bow exploded upward. It wasn't a ship. It was a mountain of wet, grey flesh. A beast rose from the black depths, dwarfing the Maiden. It looked like a cross between a sperm whale and a centipede. Its skin was plated with chitinous armor, encrusted with the wreckage of crushed ships. Masts stuck out of its back like spines. Anchors were embedded in its flippers, and it had no face. Just a vertical slit that ran the length of its blunt head, lined with rows of spinning, serrated teeth. Mother of mercy. Silas breathed. This wasn't a ghost. This was flesh. It was alive, a scavenger of the void, feeding on the scraps that fell through the cracks of the world. The beast screamed, a sound that shattered the air and made my teeth vibrate. It lunged, its massive tail slapping the water, sending a tidal wave of black sludge toward us. "Fire!" I commanded, channeling my will into the ship's batteries. The cannons roared. They didn't fire iron balls. They spat bolts of concentrated green fire, soul fire. The projectile slammed into the beast's flank. The impact didn't just burn, it withered. The grey flesh turned to ash where the fire touched, exposing the pulsating red meat beneath. The creature shrieked, thrashing wildly. "It bleeds," the ship noted with satisfaction. "It can die." "Hold fast!" I yelled as the creature's tail slammed into our hull. The maiden groaned, tipping dangerously. Wood cracked, or rather bones snapped. I felt the impact in my own ribs, a sharp, blinding pain on my left side. I coughed, tasting blood. "It's too big!" Silas shouted, clinging to the mizzenmast. "It's going to crush us!" The creature turned, its vertical maw opening wide. Inside, I saw the crushed remains of 1,000 sailors, a slurry of bone and wood. It was preparing to swallow us whole. "No," I snarled. "I did not survive hell to be eaten by a bottom feeder." I let go of the wheel. "Take the helm, Silas." "What? Alistair, are you mad?" "Take it." I sprinted to the main deck, dodging the thrashing tentacle tongues the beast shot from its mouth. I ran to the bow, to the prow, where the obsidian banshee screamed silently. I climbed onto the figurehead. The wind of the void whipped my coat. I was staring directly into the gullet of the monster. I raised my obsidian arm. The silver veins on my body flared blinding white. I wasn't drawing from the ship this time. I was drawing from me, from the passenger, from the gate I had swallowed. "Hey, ugly!" I roared. The beast paused, sensing the energy spike. I didn't throw the energy. I shaped it. I visualized a blade, a harpoon of pure light. "Chew on this." I thrust my hand forward. A beam of solid white light erupted from my palm, extending 50 feet, forming a lance of pure kinetic force. I drove it into the creature's open mouth, piercing the soft palate and driving upward into its brain. The beast went rigid. The scream died in its throat. For a second, time stood still. Then, the creature convulsed. Light poured out of its eyes, its gills, the cracks in its armor. It exploded from the inside out, showering the maiden in a rain of glowing blue ichor and chunks of meat. I collapsed onto the deck, the light fading from my arm. The pain in my ribs was agonizing. The ship settled in the water. The green fire in the lanterns returned to a steady burn. The maiden extended her roots, the tendrils of shadow, into the water, lapping up the blue blood of the fallen Leviathan. "Rich," the ship purred. "Powerful." Silas ran to me, helping me sit up. "Alistair, you killed it. We killed it," I corrected, wiping blue slime from my face. The ship softened it up. I looked at the carcass floating in the black water. It was dissolving, sinking back into the depths. But something remained. Floating amidst the gore was a massive metal object. It had been lodged in the beast's stomach. It wasn't a ship part. It was a buoy, a massive iron navigation buoy, and it was blinking, a steady red pulse. "Silas," I pointed with my shaking hand, "retrieve that." We hauled the object aboard using the cargo chains. It was rusted, covered in barnacles, but the light was unmistakable, electric, modern. On the side of the buoy, barely legible under the rust, were stenciled letters. Progetto ARCA. Cetor 9. Now ultrapass. Project Arc, I translated, though the language was Portuguese. Sector 9, do not trespass. "That's not from our time," Silas said softly. "The metal, the welding, it's from the future, or a different world entirely." I touched the blinking light. It felt warm. "This beast didn't just live here," I said, looking out at the endless violet horizon. "It wandered near the fence, and if there is a fence, Silas—" "There is a gatekeeper," he finished. "Set a course," I said, standing up despite the pain. Follow the signal. We are going to find who put this here. The red light of the rusted buoy was our North Star in a sky without constellations. We followed its rhythmic blinking for what felt like days, though my pocket watch had stopped ticking the moment we entered this accursed ocean. The Iron Maiden moved with a predator's grace, cutting through the sludge, her hunger momentarily quelled by the Leviathan's blood. "There!" Silas rasped, pointing a finger that ended in a smooth stump where his nail should have been. "On the horizon. It blocks out the violet light." It was a tower, but to call it a tower was like calling the ocean a puddle. It was a monolith of black iron and glass, rising from the sea and piercing the cloud layer above. It was so tall that looking at the summit made me dizzy. At its peak, a massive beam of light rotated, not the warm yellow of a fire-driven lantern, but a cold, clinical white beam that swept across the dark waters like a scythe. It was a lighthouse, the lighthouse at the end of the world. As we approached, the Maiden slowed. The growl in the keel died down to a whimper. The ship was afraid. "Ancient," the ship whispered in my mind. "Do not bite. Stone is too hard." "We are docking," I said to the empty air, my voice brooking no argument from the sentient wood. We pulled alongside a massive metal platform at the base of the spire. There were no bollards, only sleek metal cleats. I threw a rope, woven from the hair of the drowned, and it coiled itself around a cleat, tightening with a wet slap. "Stay with the ship," I told Silas, "and leave you to face whatever lives in that needle alone." Silas scoffed, checking the edge of his axe. "I think not. Besides, the Maiden is terrified. I'd rather be with the captain than on a cowardly ship." We disembarked. The platform hummed beneath our boots, a low, constant vibration. Zzzzt. It sounded like trapped bees. We found a door. It was a massive slab of grey metal with no handle, but as I approached, a panel on the wall flickered to life. A red beam scanned me, sweeping over my obsidian arm and my silver-veined face. A voice, synthetic and flat, spoke from the wall. "Bioscan complete. Anomaly detected. Class Revenant. Entry permitted." The door hissed and slid open, disappearing into the wall. "Sorcery," Silas muttered, making a sign against evil. "Mechanics," I corrected, though I didn't truly understand it myself. "Just advanced." We stepped inside. The interior was a vast, cylindrical chamber lined with spiraling stairs, but it was the walls that caught my eye. They were covered in glowing glass tablets, thousands of them, and on each tablet a moving picture played. I walked up to one. It showed a battlefield, men in green uniforms fighting in a jungle with weapons that spat fire faster than any musket. I looked at another. It showed a city of glass towers touching the clouds, with flying carriages zooming between them. Another showed a bedroom, where a woman was weeping over a cradle. "These are windows," I whispered, touching the cold glass. "Windows into other lives." "Up," Silas said, looking at the stairs. "Someone is watching us from the top." We climbed. The ascent was grueling. My stone arm weighed a ton, dragging on my shoulder, but I refused to stop. We passed levels filled with humming machinery, copper wires thick as snakes, and tanks of bubbling fluids. Finally, we reached the lantern room. It was a circular deck, dominated by the massive, rotating light. But in the center of the room, sitting at a desk made of chrome and cluttered with papers, was a man. He looked agonizingly normal. He wore a grey woolen sweater and thick spectacles. He was balding, with a fringe of white hair. He was drinking from a ceramic mug that had writing on it, "World's Okayest Keeper." He didn't look up as we entered, weapons drawn. He was scribbling in a ledger. "You're early," the man said. His voice was tired, dusty. "I didn't expect the 1715 timeline to merge for another century." "Identify yourself," I growled, pointing my cutlass at his throat. "Are you the devil of this place?" The man stopped writing. He sighed, took off his glasses, and cleaned them on his sweater. He looked at me, at my obsidian arm, my glowing eyes, with zero fear, only mild annoyance. "I am Elias," he said, "and please put that away. It's dripping salt water on my floor." He stood up and walked to the massive glass window, looking down at the Iron Maiden far below. "That's quite a ship you've built, Captain Blackwood," Elias said. "Ship of Theseus, isn't it? Replace every plank with cursed wood. Is it still the same ship? How do you know my name?" "I know everyone who washes up here," Elias said, gesturing to the screens. "This is the drain, Captain, the sump. When a timeline rots, when a reality fails, it falls here. I just catalogue the debris." He walked back to his desk and picked up a heavy book. "Alistair Blackwood, you were supposed to die in a hurricane off the coast of Cuba in 1718, but you didn't. You touched the idol. You derailed your destiny." He looked at me sharply. "You broke the script, and gravity pulled you down here." "I don't care about scripts," I said, stepping forward, the floor cracking under my obsidian foot. "I want out. I want to sail back to the surface." Elias chuckled. It was a dry, sad sound. "The surface? Captain, look at the sky." He pressed a button on his desk. The glass of the lighthouse darkened, filtering the light. "That isn't a sky," Elias said. I looked up, really looked. The violet haze faded, revealing what was behind it. It wasn't stars, it was strata, layers of rock and dirt and roots, miles above us. "We aren't on an ocean," Elias whispered. "We are underground, deep, deep underground. The ocean you are sailing on is the runoff of history, the psychic waste of 1,000,000,000 dead worlds." My knees felt weak. "Underground? There is no sailing out, Blackwood," Elias said, sitting back down. "There is only sailing down, to the core, or sailing around until your ship eats you." He took a sip of his tea. "However, there is a service elevator." Silas blinked. "A what?" "A shortcut," Elias explained. "But it's broken. The gears are jammed. It requires a massive amount of kinetic energy to jump-start the mechanism." He looked pointedly at my glowing obsidian arm. "Energy that you seem to have in abundance." "And if we fix this elevator?" I asked. "Where does it go?" "It goes up," Elias smiled, and for the first time the smile didn't look human. It looked too wide. "Back to the blue, back to the wind." He pulled a map from his drawer. It was an old parchment map, but the continents were wrong. "But first you have to survive the neighbors. The Leviathan you killed, that was a puppy. If you want to reach the mechanism, you have to sail through the Bone Archipelago." He slid the map across the desk. "Deal?" I looked at the map. It showed a cluster of islands made of giant skeletons, and in the center a whirlpool marked the Ascender. I looked at Silas. He nodded grimly. I holstered my cutlass. "Deal," I said. "Tell us how to kill the neighbors." Elias traced a line on the parchment map with a finger that trembled slightly. Not from age, but from the static electricity filling the room. The map depicted the Bone Archipelago, a maze of white ridges rising from the black ink of the ocean. "The current here," Elias said, tapping the center of the maze, "flows backward. It is the runoff of time, gravity, and entropy pushing down. To reach the Ascender, you must sail up a waterfall of kinetic force." He looked up at me, his spectacles reflecting the glowing green light of my own eyes. "Your ship is impressive, Captain, but she is starving. The Leviathan's blood was a snack. To breach the current, to climb the falls, you need high-grade combustion. You need a supernova in your furnace." "We will find more ships," I said, my voice echoing like metal in a cavern. "We will hunt. Drifters won't suffice." Elias shook his head. "Ghost ships have no caloric value. They are echoes. You need something real, something heavy with emotion, with life." He pressed a button on his chrome desk. The wall of screens flickered, shifting to show a live feed of a sector not far from the lighthouse. It showed a ship. It was painted white, with a large red cross on its hull. It looked pristine, untouched by the rot of the dimension. It sat in a pocket of calm water, surrounded by a faint, golden halo. "The SS St. Jude," Elias introduced, "a hospital ship from 1916. It slipped through a fog bank in the Dardanelles and fell down the drain, but it didn't shatter. The collective faith of the dying men on board, the prayers of the nurses, it created a stasis field, a bubble of pure, crystallized hope." Silas stepped forward, his one eye wide. "It's a sanctuary?" "It's a battery," Elias corrected, cold and clinical. "There are 600 souls on board, frozen in time, unaware they are in hell. If you feed that ship to your furnace, the resulting surge would be enough to punch a hole through the ceiling of this world." "They are innocents," Silas whispered, looking at the screen. He saw salvation. "We could save them. We could take them with us." Elias laughed. "Take them? Captain, your ship is a predator. If you try to board them, the Iron Maiden will eat them automatically. You can't save them. You can only leave them here to rot for eternity, or use them to escape." He looked at me. "One ship dies so another may rise. It is the law of the sea, is it not?" I looked at the white ship on the screen. I saw the Red Cross. I imagined the wounded men inside, trapped in a loop of pain and prayer. "Hope burns brighter than coal," I muttered. My obsidian arm pulsed violently, a hunger pang that nearly brought me to my knees. The maiden could smell it even from here. "Captain," Silas grabbed my good arm, "we can't do this. We are pirates, Alistair, not monsters. We don't eat nuns and wounded soldiers." I pulled my arm away. The movement was jerky, mechanical. "We are whatever we need to be to survive, Silas. Do you want to rot here? Do you want to become like Elias, a curator of dust?" "I would rather rot than burn saints," Silas yelled. I turned to Elias. "Give me the coordinates." Elias scribbled numbers on a scrap of paper and handed it to me. "Sector 4. Follow the smell of iodine and prayers. Good luck, Captain. Try not to choke on the guilt." We left the lighthouse in silence. The descent was faster than the climb. When we reached the platform, the Iron Maiden was tugging at her moorings, the green fire in her lanterns roaring with anticipation. She knew. We boarded. I took the helm. "Silas," I said, not looking at him, "go below. Prepare the furnace." "No," Silas said. He stood his ground on the quarterdeck, his axe in hand. "I won't be a part of this." I turned to face him. My obsidian hand twitched. The ship was whispering to me, urging me to remove the obstacle. "Mutiny," it hissed. "Consumable resource." I fought the urge. I forced the human part of my brain to take the wheel. "Then stay on deck," I said, my voice quiet. "Close your eyes, cover your ears, but do not interfere." I spun the wheel. The ship surged away from the lighthouse, diving back into the black dark. We sailed for 6 hours. The hunger in the keel grew so intense that the deck began to weep black sap. The bone railings sharpened into serrated spikes. Then we saw it, the St. Jude. It was glowing with a soft golden light in the distance, a beacon of purity in the filth. I could hear faint music drifting across the water, a hymn. "Pray!" the maiden screamed. "Feast!" I steered us toward the light. My heart was pounding, a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. I was about to commit an atrocity. I knew it, but the memory of the blue sky, of the wind, of home, it was stronger than my conscience. "Forgive me," I whispered. "They can't hear you," Silas said from the rail, his back to the scene. "And God isn't watching." I engaged the ship's hunger. The Iron Maiden's bow split open. Not a mouth, but a grapple. Massive chains of shadow and bone shot out from the hull. They flew across the water, smashing into the pristine white hull of the St. Jude. The golden light flickered. The hymn stopped, replaced by the screech of tearing metal. I hauled the wheel over. The maiden pulled the hospital ship closer. We didn't phase through this time. We impaled it. The shadow tendrils bored into the St. Jude, seeking the reactor of souls inside. I watched as the white paint turned grey. I watched as the Red Cross bled black. I heard the screams, thousands of them, erupting all at once as the maiden began to drain the hope from the vessel. The green fire in our furnace exploded. A pillar of emerald flame shot up through the deck, engulfing the masts. The sails caught the fire, billowing out, fully energized. The power was intoxicating. It was limitless. I felt the Iron Maiden grow. I felt her evolve. But as the St. Jude crumpled into a husk of rust and silence, sinking beneath the waves, I looked at my good hand. The skin was peeling away. Underneath it was no longer flesh. It was turning black. It was turning into obsidian. I had fed the ship, but the ship had taken a bite out of me in return. "Course set," I said, my voice entirely mechanical now, void of inflection. "To the Bone Archipelago. To the Ascender." Silas didn't answer. He was weeping. The Bone Archipelago was not a metaphor. Elias had been agonizingly literal. Rising from the black sludge of the ocean were titanic columns of white calcium. They curved upward, piercing the violet smog of the cavern ceiling, resembling the ribcage of a god that had died curling around the center of the world. The sea here was white with foam, not from wind, but from the violence of the current. The water didn't flow around the islands, it flowed down from them, crashing outward from the center in a perpetual, explosive radial tide. "It's a mountain of water," Silas shouted, his voice barely audible over the roar of the falls. He was lashed to the mizzenmast, refusing to go below, though his face was turned away from the burning green light of the furnace. "It is the Ascender," I roared back. My voice was amplified by the ship, booming from the speakers of the bone railing. I stood at the helm. Both my hands were now fused to the wheel. My legs had turned to stone up to the knees, merging with the deck. I was no longer standing on the ship. I was growing out of it. The Iron Maiden could feel the resistance of the water. It pushed against us with the weight of gravity itself. But the fuel we had consumed, the St. Jude, was potent. The hope Elias had spoken of burned hot and clean. "Full power!" I commanded. The furnace screamed. The green fire turned a blinding holy white. The sails stiffened, vibrating with tension. We hit the base of the current. The ship didn't smash. It climbed. The bow rose 45 degrees, then 60. We were sailing uphill, fighting a vertical river. The G-force pressed me down, threatening to snap my obsidian spine, but the ship held together. The blackened wood groaned, the bone railings flexing like muscles. We rose, higher and higher. The black ocean fell away below us, a dark stain in the abyss. We were navigating through the colossal ribs of the archipelago, weaving between pillars of bone that were miles high. "Trespassers!" A voice shook the cavern. It wasn't telepathy this time. It was a physical vibration in the air. From the gaps between the giant ribs, they emerged. The Guardians. They were serpentine constructs made of millions of human skulls fused together. Great white worms that slithered through the air as if swimming, their empty eye sockets whistling in the wind of the void. There were 3 of them, encircling the pillar of rising water. "They are going to ram us!" Silas screamed, struggling against his lashings. "Let them try!" I laughed. It was a cold, metallic sound. The guilt of burning the hospital ship had been cauterized by the adrenaline of the ascent. The first skullworm dove at us, its maw opening to reveal a throat of grinding molars. I didn't turn the wheel. I willed the ship to react. The Iron Maiden rolled to port, defying physics. The worm missed our hull by inches, smashing into the water beside us. The impact sent a shockwave that nearly dislodged us from the current. "Fire the starboard batteries," I thought, and the ship obeyed. The bone cannons erupted. This time, the fire wasn't green or white. It was golden, the essence of the St. Jude. The golden bolt struck the second worm. The skulls shattered on impact, disintegrating into dust. The creature shrieked, a chorus of 1,000,000 dead voices, and crumbled, falling back into the abyss below. "One down!" I shouted. The third worm was smarter. It didn't attack the hull. It attacked the propulsion. It coiled around our masts, its heavy, bony body weighing us down. The Maiden shuddered. Our ascent slowed. Gravity began to reclaim us. We started to slide backward down the waterfall. "Get it off," Silas yelled, hacking at a section of the worm that had draped over the quarterdeck. His axe chipped against the bone, useless. I couldn't leave the helm. If I let go, we would lose the angle and capsize. "Maiden!" I mentally screamed at the ship. "Eat!" The ship hesitated. Bone was not flesh. It had no soul to burn. "Do not burn it," I ordered. "Break it." The Iron Maiden extended her shadow tendrils, the same ones that had gutted the St. Jude. They wrapped around the skull worm, tightening like a constrictor snake. The ship and the Guardian wrestled in mid-air, a tangle of black wood and white bone, suspended on a wall of water. With a sickening crunch, the maiden sheared the worm in half. The heavy coils fell away. The weight lifted. The engine roared. We surged upward, breaking the sound barrier of this silent world. We passed the tips of the giant ribs. We reached the apex of the current. Above us, the sky of rock and roots ended. There was a circular opening, a mechanical iris made of brass and light, miles wide. It was rotating, grinding open. The ascender. "Brace yourself, Silas," I called out. "We're punching through." The ship aimed for the center of the iris. The white fire of the furnace enveloped us, forming a shield. We hit the membrane of the gateway. The world dissolved into white noise and pressure. My vision went blank. The sensation of the ship beneath me vanished. The hum in my blood reached a frequency that shattered thought. For a moment, I ceased to exist. And then, wind, real wind, salt, real salt. I gasped, my lungs filling with air that didn't taste of ash or rot. I opened my eyes. It was night, but the sky was filled with stars. The plough, Orion, the North Star. We were floating on a calm, dark ocean. The Iron Maiden was smoking, steam rising from her blackened hull. The bone railings were charred but intact. I looked at my hands. They were still obsidian. I tried to move my legs. They were still fused to the deck. I looked for Silas. He was slumped against the mast, unconscious but breathing. We had made it. We were back. But as I looked at the horizon, I saw the coastline. It wasn't the Caribbean. It was a city of lights that stretched as far as the eye could see, with towers of glass and steel glowing in the night. Bridges spanned the water, carrying streams of moving yellow lights. "Silas," I whispered, the realization dawning on me as I remembered the screens in the lighthouse. "Wake up!" We hadn't just traveled up, we had traveled forward. The Iron Maiden, a ghost ship fueled by souls and captained by a stone monster, had just surfaced in the 21st century. The horizon did not glow with the soft orange of a sunrise, nor the silver of the moon. It burned. It burned with a harsh, artificial amber light that bled upward into the clouds, drowning out the stars I had used to navigate for 40 years. I stood at the helm, my obsidian legs fused into the deck, vibrating with the shock of our arrival. The air here was different. It didn't smell of clean salt and rot like the drain. It smelled of sulfur, burnt oil, and something sharp and chemical that coated the back of my throat. "Silas," I said, my voice sounding too loud in the strange, humming silence of this bay. "Look." Silas pulled himself up to the railing. He stared at the coastline. His one good eye widened until I thought it might split. "It is a city of glass," he whispered, clutching his axe as if wood and iron could protect him from this. "Look at the towers, Alistair. They touch the heavens. And the lights, they don't flicker, are they candles? Thousands of candles." "No," I said, narrowing my eyes. "They are steady, like the buoy, like the lighthouse. This is a world of machines." The Iron Maiden drifted closer, her black sails hanging limp. But she didn't need wind. She sensed the energy radiating from the shore. It was overwhelming. The sheer amount of power pulsating from that city was like a deafening scream to the ship's senses. "Too loud," the ship hissed in my skull. "Too bright! Where is the prey? Everything shines, but nothing has a soul." "Quiet," I commanded the wood. "We are strangers here. We drift until we understand." But concealment was impossible. A sound approached from the water, a low, rhythmic thrumming, faster and more aggressive than any oar or sail. A beam of blinding white light cut through the darkness, sweeping across the water and locking onto us. "We are spotted!" Silas cried, shielding his face. The light was attached to a vessel. It was small, sleek, and painted grey with a diagonal red stripe. It moved without sails, churning the water white behind it. It circled us with terrifying speed. A voice boomed across the water. It was amplified, godlike in volume, coming from a horn on the small ship's roof. Unidentified vessel. This is the United States Coast Guard. You are entering a restricted shipping lane without lights or transponder. Heave to and prepare to be boarded. I didn't understand half the words. Transponder. Restricted lane. But I understood the tone. It was the tone of the Royal Navy. It was the tone of a hunter claiming authority. "They want to board us," I said, a cold smile touching my lips. My hand tightened on the wheel. "Silas, man the rail." "Against that?" Silas pointed at the metal ship. "It has no cannons, Captain, but it moves like a devil." The Coast Guard boat slowed, pulling alongside our starboard quarter. I saw men on the deck. They weren't wearing tricorns or holding cutlasses. They wore blue uniforms and held short, black metal wands. "Final warning," the voice boomed. "Cut your engines and prepare for boarding." "Engines?" I muttered. I looked at the furnace grate. The white fire of the St. Jude was fading, settling into a low, hungry simmer. "We have no engines to cut!" I roared back, my voice amplified by the ship's curse. "I am Captain Alistair Blackwood of the Iron Maiden. Keep your distance or I will sink you." The men on the modern boat paused. I saw them exchanging confused glances. One of them raised a glass device to his eyes, binoculars, but far more advanced than my spyglass. Then the mood shifted. They didn't retreat. They took aim. Crack, 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 crack. The sound was a rapid staccato, like dry wood snapping instantly. Sparks flew from our hull. Splinters of petrified wood exploded near Silas's head. "They are shooting!" Silas yelled, diving behind a barrel. "Invisible bullets!" "They dare," I snarled, "the audacity, to fire upon me, upon a vessel that had slain a leviathan and navigated the drain." "Maiden," I whispered, "show them." The ship didn't need to be told twice. The bone railing on the starboard side shifted. The ribs opened. I didn't use the cannons. That would be a waste of precious soul fuel on such a small gnat. Instead, I summoned the shadows. "Grapples!" From the dark ports of the hull, 4 thick tendrils of black ichor and shadow shot out. They moved faster than the eye could follow. They slammed into the metal hull of the Coast Guard boat. The modern steel groaned. The tendrils wrapped around the railings, the cabin, the radar mast. The men on the boat screamed. I saw them firing their weapons at the shadows, but the bullets passed harmlessly through the dark matter. "Pull!" I commanded. The Iron Maiden heaved. The Coast Guard boat was lifted partially out of the water, tilting violently. I looked down at them from my high quarterdeck. I saw the terror in their eyes. It was a look I knew well. It was the look of men who realized their reality had just been broken. "You have no authority over the dead," I bellowed. I was about to crush them, to squeeze their metal shell until it popped, when a sound from the sky stopped me. Thwop, 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 thwop. I looked up. A dragon. No, a machine. A massive, flying metal insect with a spinning blade on its back. It hovered above us, casting a cone of light so bright it felt like physical weight. A helicopter. "Captain!" Silas screamed, pointing at the horizon. "More lights! Bigger ones!" I looked past the dangling Coast Guard boat. 2 massive ships were approaching, grey behemoths, larger than any galleon, bristling with towers and guns that looked like tree trunks. The Navy. I realized then the mistake I had made. In my time, a single ship could rule the sea. In this time, there were no lone wolves. There was a hive. If I destroyed this small boat, the hive would descend. And even the Iron Maiden, with her hunger and her curse, could not fight a world of steel giants. Not yet. We were starving. We were weak. "Release them," I ordered. The tendrils slackened. The Coast Guard boat crashed back into the water, rocking violently. "We need to vanish," I said. "We cannot fight this war tonight." "Vanish where?" Silas asked, looking at the approaching armada. "They have lights in the sky. They have eyes everywhere." I looked at the city again. The towering glass structures, the shadows between the piers. "The ship eats light," I remembered. "It eats energy." I placed my obsidian hand on the helm. I closed my eyes. I reached out to the Maiden's core. "Cloak us," I whispered. "Don't reflect the light. Eat it." The green fire in the lanterns died instantly. The black wood of the hull seemed to deepen, becoming a void in the universe. The searchlight from the helicopter hit us and didn't bounce back. The light was absorbed into the planks. To the eyes of the men above, we simply ceased to exist. We became a hole in the water. Hard to port, I steered the invisible ship toward the darkest part of the harbor. Toward a graveyard of rusted metal and old barges I spotted near the industrial district. We slipped away into the shadows of the 21st century, leaving the modern sailors confused, terrified, and questioning their own sanity. We found a berth in a derelict shipyard hidden beneath the rotting overhang of a collapsed warehouse. As the Maiden settled, invisible and silent, I looked at the city skyline. "We are not the kings here, Silas," I said, watching the cars flow like a river of diamonds on a distant bridge. "We are the rats." "Rats carry the plague, Captain," Silas said, wiping soot from his axe. "Aye," I smiled, and my grey eyes swirled with the memory of the deep. "And we have brought a very old sickness to a very new world." We drifted into the shadows of the rotting pier, like a shark sliding into a sea cave. Above us, the concrete ceiling of the industrial wharf blocked out the amber glare of the city sky. The water here was stagnant, thick with oil slicks that shimmered like rainbows in the dark. I cut the connection to the helm. The sensation was like tearing a bandage off a fresh wound. My obsidian legs released their grip on the deck, but the separation was incomplete. Trails of black stone dust lingered on the planks. I stumbled, catching myself on the bone railing. "We are hidden," I rasped. My voice sounded harmonic, vibrating against the metal pilings around us. "For now." "Hidden?" Silas hissed from the darkness of the main deck. "Captain, listen to it. The city, it screams." He was right. Even here in the underbelly of the harbor, the sound was inescapable. It wasn't the roar of the ocean. It was a constant low-frequency drone, the hum of tires on asphalt, the whir of ventilation fans, the distant wail of sirens. It was the sound of a billion gears turning in a machine that never slept. "It is just noise, Silas," I said, though the vibration made my teeth ache. "Ignore it." "I can't," he whispered, clutching his head. "It's inside me. The ship is hungry." I changed the subject, feeling the Iron Maiden gnawing at my own essence. The golden fuel of the St. Jude was gone, burned up in the ascent through the Bone Archipelago. The furnace was cold. The ship was beginning to look at us as the next meal. "We need fuel," I said. "Go, scout the shore, find wood, coal, oil, anything that burns." "I am afraid to leave the ship, Alistair," Silas admitted, his voice small. "This world, it feels like it wants to crush me." "You are Silas the Unsinkable." I grabbed his collar, pulling him close. My glowing grey eyes locked onto his one good eye. "You survived the drain. You survived the Leviathan. You will not be defeated by a city of glass mongers. Go, be a ghost. Take what we need." Silas nodded, swallowing his terror. He grabbed a rusted pry bar from the deck and leaped onto the concrete walkway of the pier. He vanished into the shadows of the warehouse district. I was alone with the ship. I sat on the quarterdeck, watching the oil slick on the water. My hand, the obsidian one, was throbbing. The ship was drawing power from me to maintain the cloak of invisibility. I could feel my life force draining, drop by drop. "Patience, old girl," I whispered to the deck. "We will find you a feast." I looked at the pilings supporting the pier. Running along the underside of the concrete was a thick, black cable, thick as my arm. It hummed. Curiosity, or perhaps instinct, drove me. I climbed onto the railing and reached out with my obsidian hand. I touched the cable. Bang! It wasn't an explosion of powder, it was an explosion of light. A bolt of blue lightning arced from the cable into my hand. It didn't burn. It flowed. I gasped, my back arching. The energy rushed up my arm, bypassed my heart, and slammed directly into the ship's core. The Iron Maiden shuddered. The green fire in the furnace sparked to life, not a roar, but a sputter. It tasted metallic, cold, sour. It lacked the warmth of a soul, the complexity of a memory. It was raw, unrefined kinetic force. "More," the ship whispered. "It is dry, but it is strong." I pulled my hand back, smoke rising from my stone fingers. The cable was melted where I had touched it. Electricity, I realized. The blood of this city is lightning. I was contemplating tearing the cable loose and feeding it directly into the furnace when Silas returned. He was running, scrambling down the ladder from the pier. He jumped onto the deck, panting, his face pale as milk. He wasn't carrying coal. He was carrying a plastic bag filled with garbage. "Did you find fuel?" I asked. "I found truth," Silas wheezed, dumping the contents of the bag onto the deck. Out tumbled strange artifacts, a half-eaten burger in a styrofoam box, a glossy magazine featuring a woman with impossible skin, and a rectangular slab of black glass. A smartphone with a cracked screen. "What is this refuse?" I kicked the magazine. "The food," Silas said, pointing at the burger. "I watched a man eat one. He didn't look at it, he didn't taste it. He just shoved it in his face while staring at the glass brick." Silas picked up the burger. "Smell it, Captain. It doesn't smell like meat. It smells like chemicals, preservatives. It never rots." He looked at me with wild eyes. "The people here, they eat fake food. They live in boxes of light. But that's not the worst part." He held up the cracked smartphone. "I watched them, Alistair, walking down the street, hundreds of them. They don't look at each other. They don't look at the sky. They look into these." He pressed a button on the side of the phone. The screen lit up. It showed a picture of a smiling family. "I stole this from a man sleeping on a bench," Silas said. "When I took it," he screamed. "Not because I took his coin, but because I took this." Silas looked at the device with a mix of awe and horror. "Elias said we need souls to burn, right? High emotion, hope, fear." "Aye. They don't keep their souls in their bodies anymore, Captain," Silas whispered, tapping the glass screen. "They pour them into these machines. Their memories, their loves, their anger. It's all trapped in the glass." He looked up at the city's skyline, at the millions of lit windows. "This isn't a city of people. It's a city of phylacteries. The people are just the husks carrying the batteries." I looked at the phone. I could feel it. A faint buzzing resonance. It wasn't a full soul, but it was an echo. A fragment. "And the cables," I said, looking back at the thick wire under the pier. "The lightning connects them all." A dark idea formed in my mind. We didn't need to hunt ships. We didn't need to kidnap people. We were parasites, and we had landed on the biggest host in history. "Silas," I said, a cruel grin spreading across my face, "bring the grappling hooks. The copper ones." "Huh? What are we doing?" "We are not going to eat the garbage," I said, knocking the burger into the sea. "We are going to drink the blood." I pointed to the thick power cable. "If we hook the Iron Maiden to that line, and if what you say is true, that their souls are in the machine, then we can drain them, not their bodies, but their digital ghosts." "We're going to tap the city?" Silas asked. "We are going to drink it dry." We worked quickly. We attached heavy copper chains to the ship's main conduction mast. I leaped onto the pier and, with a single blow of my obsidian fist, smashed the concrete casing of the junction box. I wrapped the chains around the thick buzzbars inside. "Engage!" I shouted to the ship. The connection was made. The Iron Maiden didn't just absorb the electricity, she sucked it. The lights in the warehouse district flickered, then the streetlights on the highway above died. The darkness spread outward from our hiding spot, block by block, as the ship gorged herself on the city's grid. But it wasn't just power. As the current flowed into the furnace, the green fire roared with a new sound. It sounded like a million voices talking at once, snippets of conversations, text messages, emails, videos, a torrent of digital humanity flooding into the ship's belly. The Iron Maiden moaned in ecstasy. "Information," the ship shivered. "Data. Sweet, chaotic data." I stood at the helm, feeling the rush. My obsidian arm glowed with a lattice of blue light, looking like a circuit board. "We are plugged in, Silas," I laughed, the sound mingling with the hum of the dying city grid. "We are the virus in the vein." Suddenly, The phone in Silas's hand chirped. Then it began to scream, an emergency alert tone. Power failure detected. Sector 4, dark, dispatching repair teams. Silas looked at the screen, then at me. They know, he said. Let them come, I said, feeling the ship's hull harden, growing new armor made of absorbed concrete and steel. We aren't hiding anymore. We are feeding. In the distance, the sirens grew louder, but this time they didn't sound like predators. They sounded like prey. The silence of a modern city is a heavy thing. When the hum of the grid died, when the streetlights flickered and surrendered to the void, a palpable weight descended on the docks. The only light came from the Iron Maiden herself. Her hull was no longer invisible, but pulsating with a rhythmic Venus blue glow. The copper chains we had wrapped around the junction box were white-hot, humming with the gluttonous intake of the ship. "We are drinking too fast," Silas warned, watching the thick cables twitch on the deck like dying snakes. "The wood is groaning, Alistair. Even a starving man vomits if he gorges." "Let her gorge," I said, my hand on the helm trembling with feedback. "She has been empty for centuries. This is nectar." Through the connection, I could hear the city, not with my ears, but with my mind. It was a chaotic cacophony. I heard the frantic binary chattering of servers shutting down. I heard the distress signals of automated alarms. I felt the confusion of millions of microchips suddenly deprived of their lifeblood. And then I saw the lights. Real lights. Headlights. A white van with amber strobe lights flashing on its roof tore through the chain-link fence of the pier. It screeched to a halt 20 yards from our hiding spot. The side of the van read, "Metro Power and Light, Emergency Response." 2 men jumped out. They wore reflective vests and hard hats. They held flashlights that cut through the gloom, sweeping over the rusted debris of the shipyard. "Jesus, Mike, look at the junction box," one of them shouted. "It's melted. The whole casing is slag." "What caused that?" the other asked, moving closer. "A surge? A lightning strike?" Then their beams swept up. They hit the copper chains. They followed the chains up over the bone railing, up to the black masts of a 17th century frigate docked where no ship should be. The flashlights shook. "What in God's name is that?" Mike whispered. "It looks like a movie prop," the first man stammered. "Hey, you up there! This is private property. You just blew a substation." I stepped to the rail. My obsidian arm caught the reflection of their lights, glinting like a dark mirror. "This property has been commandeered," I announced, my voice amplified by the ship's speakers. "Return to your masters. Tell them the tax is being collected." "He's crazy," Mike said, reaching for his belt. He pulled out a black rectangle, a radio. "Dispatch, this is Unit 4. We have a situation at Pier 9. Some kind of boat hooked into the mains. Looks like copper theft. Massive scale. Copper theft. They thought I was a scavenger." "Stop him," I whispered to the ship. "Silence him." I didn't reach for my pistol. I reached into the current. I focused on the radio in the man's hand. It was a machine. It ran on electricity. It was connected to the invisible web. I pushed. The radio in Mike's hand didn't just stop transmitting. It shrieked. A high-pitched squeal of feedback that shattered the plastic casing. Smoke poured from the device. Mike screamed, dropping it as it burned his palm. "My hand! It burned my hand!" "Get back to the truck!" the other man yelled. They scrambled back into the van. The engine roared to life. They threw it into reverse, tires spinning on the wet concrete. "They are fleeing," Silas said, raising his pistol. "Should I shoot?" "No," I said, a strange sensation washing over me. "Wait." I could feel the van. It wasn't plugged into the grid, but it had a battery. It had an alternator. It had a computer brain governing its engine. And because the Iron Maiden was now gorging on the ambient electromagnetic field of the sector, the air itself was conductive. I reached out with my obsidian mind. I visualized the van's engine. I saw the pistons firing. I saw the spark plugs. "Halt!" I commanded. I clenched my fist. The van's engine seized instantly. The wheels locked up. The vehicle skidded to a stop, 10 feet from the gate. The men inside were shouting, pounding on the dashboard. "It's dead! The truck is dead!" "Watch this, Silas," I murmured, a dark grin spreading across my face. I flicked my finger upward. The van's headlights turned on. Then the wipers started flapping wildly. The horn began to honk, 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 in a rhythmic, mocking beat. "You are doing that," Silas whispered, looking at me with fear. "You are possessing the carriage." "I am the captain," I said, feeling the rush of power, "and this city is my crew. If it has a spark, it obeys." I focused harder. I made the van's radio blast static at maximum volume. I locked the doors. The men inside were terrified, trapped in a possessed machine. They were pounding on the glass. "Let them go," Silas said. "They are just workers, Alistair." He was right. They were insignificant. But the test was successful. I opened my hand. The van's doors clicked unlocked. The engine sputtered back to life. The horn stopped. The men didn't hesitate. They scrambled out of the van and ran on foot, abandoning their vehicle, sprinting into the darkness of the city. I turned to Silas. "We don't need to hide in the shadows, Silas. We don't need to run from their navy." I looked up at the darkened skyscrapers looming over us. If I can stop a truck with a thought, what can I do to a battleship? What can I do to those flying insects? The Iron Maiden rumbled beneath my feet. She liked the idea. She was already analyzing the data she had stolen from the van's computer. "Maps," the ship whispered. "Frequencies. Codes. We have the charts," I said. Suddenly, a new sound cut through the night. It wasn't a siren. It was a drone. A small quadrotor drone hovered near the warehouse roof. It had a camera. A red light blinked on its underbelly. It was watching us. "Silas," I pointed, "shoot that fly." Silas raised his flintlock, which the ship had modified to fire shards of bone, and fired. The shot went wide. The drone zipped away, higher, out of range. "They have eyes in the sky," Silas cursed. "Let them watch," I said, walking back to the helm. "Disconnect the cables. We have drunk enough for tonight. We need to move before the heavy guard arrives." "Where to?" Silas asked, retracting the copper chains. I looked at the data flashing in my mind. Information stolen from the power grid, a map of the harbor, and marked on it a location deep in the bay, isolated, heavy with industrial machinery. "There is an oil refinery 4 miles south," I said. "Isolated, volatile, and full of ships." I gripped the wheel. My obsidian arm pulsed blue. "We are going to build a fleet, Quartermaster. If this world runs on machines, then I am the Admiral of the Gears." We cast off. The Iron Maiden, bloated with electricity and dangerous knowledge, slipped back into the black water. We were no longer just refugees from the past. We were an active virus, and the fever was just beginning. The refinery was a city unto itself, a sprawling labyrinth of distillation towers, spherical tanks, and miles of piping that hissed steam into the night air. The sodium lights bathed everything in a sickly, jaundiced orange glow. It smelled of ancient liquefied death, the compressed remains of dinosaurs and forests processed into profit. To the Iron Maiden, it smelled like a buffet. We glided silently toward the loading terminal, the ship's hunger purring in the keel. The water here was thick, black and heavy. "There," I pointed with my obsidian hand. "The flagship." Docked at the main terminal was a Leviathan, a supertanker. The stern read MV Goliath. It was a monstrosity of modern engineering, 1,000 feet of red-painted steel, flat and ugly, designed for capacity, not grace. It sat low in the water, its belly full of crude oil. "It's a floating warehouse," Silas spat, looking up at the sheer wall of the tanker's hull. "It has no soul, Captain. It's just a bucket." "It has mass," I corrected. "It has armor, and most importantly, it has engines that can push a mountain. We don't need it to have a soul, Silas. We are going to give it one." We pulled alongside the Goliath. The Iron Maiden looked like a toy next to the supertanker. "Grapples," I ordered. The black tendrils shot from our hull, latching onto the maintenance ladders of the Goliath. I climbed first, my stone legs clinging to the rungs with unnatural grip. Silas followed, grumbling. The deck of the supertanker was vast and deserted. The crew was likely in the superstructure or ashore on leave. The silence was absolute, save for the hum of the auxiliary generators. I walked to the center of the deck, near the massive pumping manifolds. I knelt and placed my obsidian hand flat against the cold steel. I closed my eyes. I reached out. The Goliath felt vast, empty, cold. It was a complex machine, governed by logic circuits and hydraulic pressure. It didn't dream. It didn't fear. "Wake up," I whispered, sending a pulse of the stolen city electricity into the deck. The metal groaned beneath my hand. The lights on the ship's bridge flickered, but the ship resisted. It was too sterile. The steel was too refined. It lacked the organic memory of wood. It didn't know how to be a ghost. "It refuses," I hissed, opening my eyes. "It is too dead." "Then leave it," Silas said, looking nervously at the refinery towers. "Let's steal the oil and go." "No," I stood up. "It refuses because it lacks the infection. It needs the blood." I drew my cutlass. I turned to the railing where the Iron Maiden was tethered below. "Maiden!" I called out. "Share the gift," the Iron Maiden responded. The black vines that held us to the tanker began to pulse. They didn't just hold the ship. They began to burrow. The shadow matter dissolved the modern steel, pushing deep into the hull of the Goliath. I watched as the corruption spread. It started at the rail. The red paint began to peel and flake, revealing not rust, but black, petrified wood underneath. The steel deck plates rippled, turning soft, looking like wet leather. The infection raced across the deck. Pipes twisted, growing thorns. The fluorescent work lights shattered, replaced by the flickering green fire of the drain. And then the sound began. It wasn't a mechanical startup sequence. It was a scream. The Goliath shrieked as its internal geometry was rewritten. The bridge windows blew out. The radar dish on the mast melted, reforming into a jagged skeletal claw. "It's hurting it," Silas yelled, covering his ears. "You're torturing the metal." "I am birthing it," I roared over the noise. I felt the connection snap into place. The Goliath was no longer resisting. It was terrified. It was in pain. And in that pain, it found a soul. A broken, twisted, artificial soul. I ran toward the bridge, kicking open the bulkhead door. The interior was chaos. Consoles were sparking, screens flashing cryptic symbols in green code. I grabbed the main throttle. It was hot to the touch. "You are mine now," I snarled at the ship. "You are not Goliath. You are the Iron Lazarus." I pushed the throttle forward. Deep in the bowels of the ship, the massive diesel engines roared to life, but they didn't sound like engines anymore. They sounded like a heartbeat. Thump, 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 thump. The Lazarus lurched away from the dock, tearing the loading hoses. Black oil sprayed onto the deck, instantly igniting into green flame. "We have control!" I shouted, laughing with the sheer rush of it, but my victory was cut short. "Captain!" Silas's voice came over the ship's intercom. The Maiden was now broadcasting directly into the Lazarus. "We have company! The hive is awake!" I looked out the shattered bridge window. The refinery alarms were blaring, and on the water, racing toward us from the harbor entrance, were 3 ships. They were grey, sleek, and bristling with guns. Navy destroyers. And in the sky, the drones were back, a swarm of them. "Target acquired," a digital voice echoed from the Lazarus's own radio. "Vessel is non-compliant. Engage with lethal force." They weren't hailing us this time. They were opening fire. A shell whizzed past the bridge, slamming into a storage tank on the shore behind us. A massive fireball erupted, turning the night into day. "They missed!" Silas yelled from the Maiden. "They didn't miss," I said, watching the destroyers fan out. "They are bracketing us." I looked at the Iron Maiden, bobbing in the shadow of the Lazarus. She was agile, hidden, but the Lazarus was a floating mountain, a sitting duck. We cannot outrun them in this tub, I realized. But then I looked at the Lazarus's cargo manifest on the glowing green screen. Cargo, 2 million barrels. Crude. I looked at the destroyers. I looked at the black veins pulsing through the Lazarus. "We don't need to run," I whispered. I grabbed the radio handset. I didn't know if they could hear me, but I knew the maiden could amplify it. "This is Captain Blackwood," I said, my voice calm, cold. "You bring fire to a oil fight?" I placed my hand on the console. I channeled the power, the electricity from the city, the soul fire from the St. Jude, the hunger of the maiden. I pushed it all into the crude oil in the tanks below. "Burn," I commanded. I didn't blow the ship up. I ignited the cargo without oxygen. I turned the crude oil into necrotic plasma. The Lazarus began to glow red-hot. The green flames on the deck turned white. "Silas, cut the lines," I ordered. "Get the maiden clear." "What about you?" "I am the Admiral," I shouted. "I will jump." The maiden detached, slipping away into the smoke. I steered the burning, screaming supertanker directly at the lead destroyer. The Navy ship tried to turn. It fired its main gun. The shell hit the Lazarus, punching a hole in the bow, but it didn't stop the momentum. We were 100,000 tons of burning hate. I locked the wheel. I ran to the rail. The maiden was passing below. I leaped. I hit the deck of my own ship hard, the wood absorbing the impact. "Hard to starboard!" I screamed. We peeled away just as the Iron Lazarus collided with the destroyer. It wasn't a crash. It was an apocalypse. The Lazarus exploded, but it wasn't a normal explosion. It was an expanding sphere of green ghost fire and boiling oil. It engulfed the destroyer instantly. The steel of the Navy ship didn't just melt, it screamed. The sailors vaporized. The shockwave hit us, pushing the maiden almost onto her side. We rode the wave of destruction, surfing on a tide of fire. As we stabilized, drifting back into the darkness, I looked back. The destroyer was gone. The Lazarus was gone. The refinery was burning. But in the center of the burning water, something was rising. A skeletal shape, fused metal, the prow of the destroyer welded to the stern of the tanker. It dragged itself out of the fire, dripping molten steel. The Lazarus hadn't died. It had merged. It had taken a body. "Father," the monstrosity moaned over the radio frequencies. I stood on the quarterdeck, covered in soot, my eyes glowing like twin stars. "Welcome to the fleet," I whispered. The burning waters of the bay reflected a hellscape that was entirely my creation. The refinery was a torch, casting long, wavering shadows across the industrial wasteland. Behind the Iron Maiden, our new child followed, the Iron Lazarus. It was a nightmare of geometry. The sleek, grey bow of the Navy destroyer had been fused into the massive red flank of the supertanker. Molten steel had cooled into scar tissue that looked uncomfortably like muscle. The destroyer's guns were still active, tracking targets with a jerky, twitching motion of a severed limb, but they were now fed by the green fire of the tanker's corrupted heart. "It awaits orders," the maiden whispered, sounding both proud and disgusted by its offspring. "Hold position," I commanded, my voice weary. The jump from the exploding tanker had jarred my stone bones. Cracks were visible in my obsidian forearm, leaking faint blue light. I expected a counterattack. I expected the sky to turn black with more of those metal insects, or for the horizon to light up with missile fire. But there was nothing. The sirens on the shore cut out abruptly. The remaining Navy ships stopped firing and turned away, retreating in perfect formation. The drones that had been buzzing like angry wasps suddenly froze in mid-air, their red eyes turning a calm, synchronized blue. "They are retreating?" Silas asked, peering through the smoke. "Did we break them?" "No," I said, looking at the unnatural stillness of the drones. "Armies don't retreat when they are winning, Silas. They retreat when the general walks onto the field." The air pressure dropped. The hairs on my arms stood up. A low hum, deeper and more powerful than the maiden's own frequency, began to vibrate the water. Then the sky changed. The swarm of drones, hundreds of them, moved. They didn't attack. They coalesced. They flew together, forming a massive three-dimensional shape in the night sky above the burning harbor. Points of light connected to form a face. It was a human face, a colossal mask of light, looking down at us like God peering into a fishbowl. A voice descended from the sky. It didn't come from speakers. It was projected directly into the air, using sound waves so intense they rippled the water. Captain Alistair Blackwood, designation, anomaly 0 to 9. You are far from your charted course. The voice was calm, civilized. It sounded like Elias, the lighthouse keeper, but stripped of all fatigue and empathy. I chart my own course, I shouted at the sky face. Who addresses me? The drone face shifted, the lips moving in perfect sync with the booming voice. I am Director Vance, head of the ARCA project, Sector 9 Division. ARCA, the name on the buoy, the name on the beast. You have caused significant damage to municipal infrastructure, Captain. You have destroyed $1 billion of naval assets, and you have violated the laws of thermodynamics. I am a pirate, I snarled, raising my obsidian fist. I violate laws for a living. Come down here and arrest me if you dare. The giant face chuckled. The sound was like thunder rolling over the hills. Arrest you? Captain, you misunderstand. I don't want to arrest you, I want to hire you. Silas looked at me, his jaw dropping. Hire us? We monitor the drain, Vance continued. We put the buoys there, we built the lighthouse, we keep the trash of history from spilling back up. Usually, things that fall down stay down. But you climbed back up. And you brought a weapon with you. The drones shifted again, showing a schematic of the Iron Maiden. A ship that eats energy, that converts matter into necrotic plasma, that can merge organic and inorganic material. Do you have any idea how valuable that technology is? My ship is not technology, I spat. She's alive. Everything is technology, Captain. Magic is just code we haven't cracked yet. I am offering you a pardon. Dock your vessels. Surrender the logbook of the San Gabriel. Yes, we know about the book. Join ARCA. We will give you a purpose. We will give you oceans you can't even imagine. And if I refuse, the face stopped smiling. Then we will classify you as a hostile biological outbreak, and we will sanitize the harbor. As he spoke, the water around us began to bubble, not from heat, but from below. Sonar pings echoed against our hull, loud, painful pings. They have submarines, Silas realized, below us. We are surrounded, I muttered. I looked at the giant face of light. I looked at the city of glass. I looked at the iron Lazarus, my monstrosity. Director Vance offered survival. He offered a place in this strange new world. All I had to do was kneel. All I had to do was become a dog on a leash, just like I had been for the crown 300 years ago. I touched the hilt of my cutlass. I felt the maiden bristling under my feet. "Director!" I yelled, my voice amplified by the ship's fury. "I have a counter-offer." The face waited. "I will not surrender the book, I will not dock, and I will not serve." I turned to the Iron Lazarus. "Fire!" I commanded. The hybrid ship obeyed instantly. The main guns of the destroyer, now fused with the tanker, swiveled upward. They didn't aim at the ships. They didn't aim at the shore. They aimed at the face in the sky. Green bolts of soul fire erupted from the Lazarus. They tore through the sky, slamming into the swarm of drones. The face disintegrated. Hundreds of drones exploded in showers of sparks and plastic. The image of Director Vance shattered into chaos. "Hostile confirmed!" The remaining drones screeched in unison. "Sanitize!" The water around us erupted as 4 torpedoes broke the surface, streaking toward us from the hidden submarines. "Evasive!" I screamed, spinning the wheel. The Iron Maiden phased into shadow, the torpedoes passing harmlessly through her hull. But the Lazarus was too big, too solid. 2 torpedoes slammed into the hybrid ship, but the Lazarus didn't sink. The black biological armor absorbed the impact. The explosion tore a chunk of meat metal from the flank, but the wound instantly began to knit itself shut, fed by the massive reserves of oil. The Lazarus roared, a sound of pure rage, and fired its depth charges. The underwater explosions rocked the harbor, crushing the delicate hulls of the submarines below. We are at war, Silas, I laughed, the thrill of the fight burning away the pain in my bones. A real war. Where do we go? Silas yelled, reloading his bone pistol. We can't stay here. Vance said he monitors the drain, I said, watching the drones regroup for an attack run. He said they have a headquarters, Sector 9. I looked at the burning city. We aren't running away, Silas. We are going to find where this director lives, and we are going to burn his house down. Then I pointed the maiden's bow toward the open river mouth, away from the harbour, heading inland. Into the river, I ordered. They expect us to go to sea. We are going into the heart of their territory. As the Iron Maiden and the Iron Lazarus surged up the wide, dark river, passing under the glittering bridges of the metropolis, I knew we had crossed a line. We were no longer just pirates. We were an invasion. The river was a serpent of oil and moonlight, winding its way through the industrial guts of the continent. We had left the salt spray behind. The air now smelled of wet earth, pine, and the ozone discharge of high-tension power lines that crisscrossed the sky like the webs of iron spiders. We were a procession of monstrosities. The Iron Maiden, pulsing with the stolen electricity of the city, led the way. Behind us, wallowing in the deep channel, was the Iron Lazarus. The hybrid supertanker destroyer was too large for the smaller bends. It simply smashed through them, its armoured prow carving the riverbanks wider, toppling trees and dragging mud into its wake. "People are watching," Silas said, standing on the quarterdeck. He pointed a shaking finger toward a highway that ran parallel to the river. Cars had stopped, hundreds of them. The modern citizens stood by their metal carriages, holding up their glowing glass rectangles, filming us. They didn't run. They didn't scream. They just watched, paralyzed by the spectacle of a 17th-century frigate and a necrotic warship sailing past their suburban lives. "They think it is a show," I murmured, watching the tiny flashes of light from their devices. "They have forgotten what danger looks like. They think the screen protects them. Let them watch," I said to the ship. "Let them record the end of their world." We sailed for hours, moving deeper inland. The city lights faded, replaced by the dark silhouettes of hills. But the hum, the signal I was tracking, grew louder. It wasn't the chaotic buzz of the city grid anymore. It was a focused, rhythmic pulse, a heartbeat. Thrum, thrum, thrum. "Captain," Silas warned, "ahead! The river is blocked." I looked forward. Looming out of the darkness was a colossal wall of concrete, a hydroelectric dam. It spanned the entire width of the valley, holding back a massive reservoir of black water. But this was no ordinary dam. There were no spillways for water regulation. The concrete face was covered in strange hexagonal arrays of copper and crystal. Massive cables ran from the turbines, not to the grid, but into a central spire built into the rock face, a spire that looked disturbingly like the lighthouse at the end of the world. And guarding the top of the dam were not soldiers, but figures in white robes. They stood perfectly still, holding staves tipped with glowing blue circuitry. "A temple?" Silas asked. "A factory," I corrected. I steered the Iron Maiden closer. The current here was strong, the water agitated as it was sucked into the intakes at the base of the dam. A voice projected from the dam, amplified over the roar of the water. "Halt, traveller! You enter the communion zone. Submit for purification." I ignored the command. I reached out with my obsidian mind, trying to sense the machinery inside the dam, just as I had with the van and the refinery. I hit a wall. It wasn't a physical wall. It was a psychic firewall. My mind recoiled, stinging as if I had touched a hot stove. "They are shielded," I hissed, nursing my stone hand. "They are using the same energy we are. They are using the drain." I looked at the water rushing into the turbines. I focused my spectral sight. The water wasn't just turning blades. As it passed through the hexagonal arrays, I saw something being stripped from it. Faint, ghostly vapors, memories, echoes. "By the depths," I whispered. "They aren't generating electricity, Silas. They are filtering the water. They are harvesting the ghosts." "Harvesting? Every drop of water on this planet has passed through 1 million lives," I said. watching the process with sick fascination. Dinosaurs, kings, peasants, the water holds the memory. This dam, it strips the memory out. It bottles the ghosts. Why? To build something, I said. Director Vance spoke of code, of unlocking magic. You don't do that with coal, you do it with spirit. The figures in white robes raised their staves, blue lightning arced between them, forming a barrier of crackling energy across the river. Final warning. Submit. I turned to the Iron Lazarus. Break it, I commanded. The Lazarus didn't use its guns this time. It used its bulk. The massive ship accelerated, its engines roaring with the sound of 1,000 screaming souls. It bypassed the Maiden, heading straight for the center of the dam. The blue energy barrier hit the Lazarus. Sparks showered the river. The paint on the hull blistered. But the ship was already dead. It could not be killed again. The Lazarus slammed into the concrete wall. The impact shook the earth. I saw the cars on the distant highway bounce on their suspension. Concrete cracked. The hexagonal arrays shattered. The white-robed figures were thrown from the parapet like ragdolls. The dam groaned. A spiderweb of fractures spread from the impact point. Again, I ordered. The Lazarus backed up, churning the mud, and rammed the wall a second time. Crack. The dam failed. It didn't burst all at once. It began to weep. Jets of high-pressure water shot out from the cracks. But it wasn't just water. It was the concentrated essence they had been harvesting. A mist of white vapor exploded outward. As it hit the air, the mist formed shapes. Phantom horses, soldiers from forgotten wars, extinct birds. They swirled around us, confused, liberated. The release of energy was cataclysmic. The psychic firewall collapsed. I seized the opportunity. I thrust my mind into the breach, connecting to the dam's internal network. I saw it. I saw the blueprint. Data flooded my brain. Files, schematics, logs, Project Pantheon. Objective, artificial divinity. Status, harvesting phase 40%. They aren't just opening a gate, Silas, I gasped, staggering back against the helm as the information burned into my memory. Cortez wanted to summon a god. RCA, they are trying to build one. I saw the schematic of a massive machine, located miles away, deep in the mountains. A machine made of flesh and circuitry, waiting for the fuel this dam was providing. They are building a vessel, I said, my voice trembling with rage. A mechanical body for the Leviathan. The dam crumbled completely. A wall of water released, carrying the Iron Maiden and the Lazarus upward, surging over the ruins of the concrete, riding the flood wave into the reservoir beyond. We were now in the high lake. The water was calm here, dark and deep, and on the far shore, nestled in the valley, was a facility. A sprawling complex of domes and towers, glowing with that sterile white light. The heart of the beast. Sector 9, I confirmed. I looked at Silas. He was watching the released ghosts fade into the night sky. They are enslaving the afterlife, Silas said, gripping his axe until his knuckles were white. They are processing heaven and hell into batteries. Then we are the sabotage, I said, pointing my cutlass at the glowing facility. Maiden, Lazarus, full speed. We sailed across the reservoir. We were no longer pirates seeking gold. We were the immune system of a reality that was being poisoned, and we were about to induce a very high fever. The reservoir was a mirror of black glass, reflecting the cold, clinical lights of Sector 9. The facility didn't look like a fortress. It looked like a hospital for giants. Vast, white domes clustered around a central tower that pierced the night sky, humming with a frequency that made the water ripple in geometric patterns. "They know we are here," Silas whispered, checking the priming on his bone pistol. "Why aren't they firing?" "Because they are arrogant," I said, my obsidian hand tightening on the wheel. "They think they are the gods of this world. They don't fear the ants." I turned to the Iron Lazarus, floating silently off our starboard beam, its fused hull dripping with the oily slime of the corrupted river. "Wake them up," I commanded. The Lazarus obeyed. Its main batteries swiveled. The green soul fire gathered in the barrels, illuminating the night with the color of sickness. Boom! The volley hit the perimeter wall of Sector 9. The explosion was magnificent, a flower of concrete dust and green plasma. The shockwave shattered the windows of the outer labs. Alarms finally began to scream, a digital wail that sounded more like a glitch than a siren. "Advance!" I roared. "Burn it all!" The Iron Maiden surged forward, propelled by the hate of the dead. We fired our own cannons, shards of bone and shadow slamming into the pristine white buildings. The response from ARCA was immediate and surgical. Turrets emerged from the ground, sleek and automated. They fired beams of coherent light, lasers. They cut through the air with a snap hiss, slicing into the hull of the Lazarus. But the necrotic armor of the hybrid ship simply absorbed the heat, the wounds sizzling and closing as the ship cannibalized its own mass to heal. We breached the inner harbor. We were close now. Close enough to see figures running on the walkways, scientists in hazmat suits fleeing the nightmare that had risen from their reservoir. "Target the central tower," I shouted. "That's the brain." But before the Lazarus could fire again, the water around the tower began to boil. The tower didn't collapse. It opened. The white panels of the structure slid back like the petals of a blooming flower. Steam hissed, thick and white, obscuring the base. And from the center of the steam, IT rose. It was Project Pantheon, the artificial divinity. It was immense, a humanoid torso made of chrome and white ceramic, suspended by thousands of thick black cables that disappeared into the earth. It had no legs. It was wired directly into the planet. Its head was a smooth, faceless oval of black glass, surrounded by a halo of floating data screens. It didn't have arms. It had wings, but they weren't wings of feather or skin. They were arrays of hard light projectors, shimmering like angel wings, made of laser grids. "Observation!" a voice boomed. It wasn't sound. It was a direct overwrite of my thoughts. "The virus has arrived." The entity turned its faceless head toward us. The halo of screens spun rapidly, calculating. Analysis. Necrotic biological matter fused with archaic naval technology. Interesting, crude, but interesting. "Fire!" I screamed at the Lazarus. The Lazarus fired a full broadside. 6 shells of green plasma, enough to level a city block. The entity raised a wing. The air in front of it shimmered. A hexagon of hard light materialized. The shells hit the shield and stopped. They didn't explode. They hung there, suspended in stasis. "Kinetic energy redirected," the entity stated. The wing flicked forward. The shells were launched back at us. "Hard to port," I yelled, throwing the wheel. The Iron Maiden twisted, dodging 2 of the shells. But the Lazarus was too slow. 3 of its own projectiles slammed back into its deck. The explosion tore the hybrid ship in half. The Lazarus screamed, a sound of tearing metal and dying souls. The front half of the ship sank instantly. The rear half, the tanker section, bobbed in the water, leaking burning oil. "It killed the Lazarus with a wave of its hand," Silas gasped, backing away from the rail. "It's a god, Alistair. It really is a god." "It's a machine," I spat, though fear was clawing at my own gut. "And machines can be broken." The entity turned its attention to the Iron Maiden. The black glass face reflected our tiny wooden form. Query: "Why do you resist, Captain Blackwood? I am the culmination of your species. I am the order you seek." "I seek freedom," I yelled, channeling the ship's power into my voice. "Not a cage made of math." "Freedom is chaos," the entity replied. "Chaos is inefficient. I have processed the ghosts of 10 million ancestors. Their consensus is clear. They desire peace. I will provide it by assimilating everything." The cables connecting the entity to the ground began to pulse. The water of the reservoir turned white as electricity poured into the lake. Assimilation sequence initiated. The entity reached out with its mind. Not a physical attack, a digital one. I felt it hit the Iron Maiden. The entity wasn't trying to blow us up, it was trying to hack us. The green fire in our lanterns turned blue, the color of SCA. The wheel froze under my hands. The ship screamed in my mind, a sound of violation. "Get out!" I roared, pouring my own will into the wood, fighting the intrusion. "She is mine!" "She is compatible," the entity noted coldly. "Her architecture, the ability to convert matter to energy, it is useful. I will take the ship. You are redundant." My obsidian arm began to vibrate. The entity was hacking me too. It was trying to turn off my heart. I fell to my knees, gasping, my vision blurring with scrolling code. "Captain!" Silas rushed to me, grabbing my shoulders. "Fight it!" "I can't," I wheezed. "It's too strong. It's inside the walls." The Iron Maiden began to move on its own. It turned toward the entity. We were being pulled in. We were going to be integrated into the machine god. I looked at the ruin of the Lazarus burning in the water. I looked at the massive cables feeding the entity. "The cables!" "Silas!" I gasped, pointing with a paralyzed hand. "The cables, they are grounded in the earth, but the water is conductive." "What? If we can't shoot it?" I gritted my teeth, blood running from my nose. "We have to short-circuit it." I looked at the Lazarus's wreck. The tanker section was still afloat, and it was still full of crude oil. "Silas, take the helm. Use the manual override. Ram the Lazarus's wreckage." "Ram it? Why?" "Push it into the cables," I screamed, the effort nearly stopping my heart. "Coat the god in oil, and then we burn the sky." Silas looked at the entity looming over us, its wings preparing to dissect our ship. He looked at me, broken on the deck. He grabbed the wheel. He didn't use magic, he used muscle. He broke the entity's hold on the rudder with sheer, desperate force. "Hold on, Alistair!" Silas spun the wheel. The Iron Maiden swung around, her bow aiming not at the entity, but at the floating stern of the Lazarus. We slammed into our fallen child. We pushed. The wreck of the tanker slid across the water, pushed by our momentum. It drifted closer to the central tower, closer to the pulsing black cables. The entity realized too late what we were doing. "Illogical," it boomed. "Combustion is primitive." The Lazarus wreckage hit the cables. The oil tanks ruptured completely. A tidal wave of black sludge coated the base of the machine god. I forced myself to stand. I summoned the last spark of the St. Jude left in the furnace. I raised my hand. "Let there be light," I whispered. I threw a bolt of soul fire into the oil. I have seen volcanoes erupt in the Pacific. I have seen magazines explode on ships of the line, but I have never seen a god burn. When my bolt of soulfire touched the sea of crude oil surrounding the entity, the reaction was instantaneous. It didn't ignite with a whoosh. It detonated with a sound that felt like the planet cracking open. But it wasn't a clean fire. It was a blasphemy of physics. The green necrotic plasma of the Lazarus mixed with the black hydrocarbons of the oil, and then collided with the blinding blue electricity of the machine god's cables. The result was a tricolor apocalypse. A spiraling pillar of fire, violet, emerald, and vantablack, shot 3 miles into the night sky, punching a hole through the cloud layer. "Critical failure!" the entity shrieked. Its voice was no longer booming and godlike. It was a digital screech, distorted by pain and static. "Temperature exceeds parameters. Core integrity compromised. I burn." The massive black cables acting as the entity's roots began to melt. They whipped around wildly, spraying molten copper and plastic like severed arteries. As each cable snapped, the white ceramic armor of the torso cracked. The wings of hard light flickered and died, leaving the machine dangling helplessly above the inferno. "Back!" I screamed, shielding my eyes from the glare that was brighter than 1,000 suns. "Get us back!" Silas spun the wheel, but the air itself was burning. The shockwave hit us. It wasn't a wall of wind. It was a wall of heat and force. The Iron Maiden was lifted out of the water. We were airborne. For a terrifying heartbeat, a 17th century frigate flew through the air, riding the breath of a dying god. We slammed back down into the boiling reservoir 500 yards away. The masts groaned, the wood screaming in protest. The bone railings on the port side shattered. "We are taking on water!" Silas yelled, pulling himself up from the deck. "The hull is cracked! Let it drink!" I roared, staggering to the rail. "Maiden, don't fight the fire, eat the fallout!" I slammed my obsidian hand onto the deck. I forced the ship to open its pores. The ambient energy of the explosion, the radiation, the heat, the loose magic washed over us. Instead of incinerating us, the Iron Maiden absorbed it. Her black wood glowed white-hot, then cooled instantly to a diamond-hard grey. She was adapting. She was evolving in the kiln of war. In the center of the lake, the entity was dying. The fire had reached the central tower, the brain of Sector 9. The glass face of the machine god looked at me one last time. "You are obsolete," it stuttered, the screens around its head shattering one by one. "I am inevitable," I whispered. The tower collapsed. The entity fell. It crashed into the boiling lake with the force of a meteor. The displacement created a tsunami of sludge and steam that raced toward the dam ruins. "Hold fast!" I bellowed. The wave caught us. We were swept backward over the lip of the broken dam and hurled down into the valley below. We surfed the flood, crashing through trees, smashing through the remnants of the ARCA facility's outer wall. We finally came to rest miles downstream, lodged in a muddy bank where the river widened. Silence returned. The sky behind us was still glowing violet from the residual energy. A mushroom cloud of ionized gas hung over Sector 9. I stood on the quarterdeck, smoke rising from my coat. My obsidian arm was cracked spiderweb thin from the elbow to the wrist, pulsing with a weak, erratic light. Silas walked up to me. He was covered in mud, bleeding from a cut on his forehead, but alive. He looked at the destruction. He looked at the burning horizon. "Did we kill it?" he asked softly. "We broke its body," I said, leaning heavily on the helm. "But a thing like that, it lives in the wires, Silas. It lives in the signal." I pointed to the sky. The stars were back. The drones were gone. The artificial amber glow of the city in the distance had dimmed. We had caused a blackout that likely stretched for 1,000 miles. "We hurt it," I said. "We blinded it." Suddenly, a sound came from the radio on the bridge, the one we had salvaged from the Lazarus before it died. It wasn't a voice. It was a repeating sequence of numbers. 4, 8, 15, 16, 23, 42. "Numbers," Silas spat. "More math." "Coordinates," I corrected. "Or a countdown." I looked at the Iron Maiden. She was battered. The bone railing was decimated. The sails were scorched. But the keel was purring louder than ever. She had tasted the blood of a god, and she liked it. "We cannot stay here," I said. "When the lights come back on, every soldier on this continent will be hunting us." "Where do we go?" Silas asked. "The ocean is blocked by the Navy. The river is a dead end." I walked to the map table. The cartilage surface was healing, glowing faintly. I traced the river line. It connected to a series of lakes, and then nothing, just land. But then I remembered the buoy, the lighthouse, Elias, the drain. "Silas," I said, turning to him with a look that made him step back. "The entity said we violated the laws of physics." "Aye? Let's break one more." I pointed to the Iron Maiden's shadow. It was long, stretching out across the muddy bank in the moonlight. "The ship can phase," I said. "We did it to avoid the torpedoes. We did it to hide in the harbor, but we always stayed on the surface." "What are you suggesting?" "We don't sail back down the river," I said, my grey eyes swirling like a storm. "We sail down." "Underwater?" "Into the shadow," I said. "Into the solid earth. If the Maiden can become a ghost, then we can sail through the mountain itself." Silas looked at the massive peaks surrounding us. "That is suicide, Alistair. If the phase fails, we will be entombed in rock forever." "Better to be a fossil than a prisoner," I said. I gripped the wheel. I closed my eyes. I visualized the atoms of the ship vibrating, separating, becoming mist. "Dive," I commanded. The Iron Maiden didn't sink into water. She sank into the mud. The solid ground became like fog to us. We slipped beneath the surface of the earth, leaving the burning sky behind, descending into the cool, dark crust of the planet. We were sailing through stone, and in the darkness of the lithosphere I saw lights, not electric lights. Bioluminescent veins running through the rock, ancient, deep. "We aren't alone down here," Silas whispered, looking out the porthole at a passing cavern filled with glowing crystals. "No," I smiled in the dark. "This is the hollow earth, Silas, and I believe we just found the back door." Sailing through granite is a silent affair. There is no splash of waves, no creak of timber. There is only a crushing, claustrophobic pressure that pushes against the mind rather than the hull. We were ghosts passing through a tomb, the Iron Maiden held in a state of intangible suspension by the sheer will of her hunger. "My eyes play tricks," Silas whispered, staring out into the absolute darkness of the solid rock surrounding us. "I see faces in the stone, Captain. Sleeping faces." "Fossils," I muttered, my obsidian hand gripping the wheel to keep us phasing. "Or memories the earth refused to swallow." We descended for what felt like hours, dropping miles beneath the burning surface world. The heat should have incinerated us, but the phase shift kept us cold, insulated from the magma veins that pulsed like glowing red arteries in the distance. Then the density dropped. The rock gave way to air, stale, sulphurous, ancient air. The Iron Maiden burst from the ceiling of a cavern so vast it defied comprehension. We free fell for a terrifying moment before slamming into water, real water. We bobbed in a subterranean sea, pitch black but illuminated by forests of bioluminescent fungi that grew on the cavern walls, casting a spectral blue glow over everything. The ceiling was miles above, glittering with mica and quartz like a false, starry sky. "The hollow earth," Silas breathed, looking around in awe. "It's real." "It's a cellar," I corrected, sensing the energy of the place. "It's where they sweep the dust." We were not alone. As my eyes adjusted to the gloom, I saw them, ships, hundreds of them, but not like the Iron Lazarus or the ghost ships of the drain. These were patchwork, vessels made from the refuse of history. I saw a Roman trireme fitted with a steam engine. I saw a Viking longship welded to the fuselage of a World War II bomber. I saw a Polynesian catamaran with sails made of modern Kevlar. They were docked at a ramshackle city built into the stalagmites rising from the water, a shanty town of scrap metal, neon signs, and ancient stone. "They are watching us," Silas said, pointing to the nearest vessel. A submarine surfaced nearby, painted with tribal markings. A signal light flashed from the submarine, ... "They know Morse code?" I asked. "They know everything we know," a voice answered. But it didn't come from the radio. It came from the darkness of the deck. I spun around, drawing my cutlass. A figure stepped out from behind the mizzenmast. How she had boarded without triggering the ship's hunger, I did not know. She was tall, her skin as pale as the cave fungi. She wore a flight jacket from the 20th century over a suit of samurai armor. One side of her face was covered by a complex brass monocle that whirred softly. "Who are you?" I demanded. "State your name, or I will feed you to the keel." "The keel is full," she said calmly, looking at the glowing veins of the maiden. "You reek of god blood, Captain Blackwood. You smell like ozone and murder." She stepped closer, unafraid of my obsidian arm. "I am Kale, Admiral of the Scavenger Fleet, and you are the idiot who just punched the warden in the nose." "The warden?" "The machine god," Kyle said. "Project Pantheon, whatever you want to call it. We heard the scream. We felt the shockwave all the way down here." She walked to the rail and whistled. From the water, shapes emerged. Men and women climbed onto the Iron Maiden. They were like their ships, a mix of eras. A redcoat soldier with a laser rifle, an Aztec priest with a cybernetic arm, a distinct-looking woman in a pilot's outfit. "We are the erased," Kyle explained, gesturing to her people. "The glitches, the anomalies. ARCA tries to keep the timeline clean. When someone survives a plague they shouldn't, or invents a machine too early, or steals a cursed ship, they erase them. They kill them," I said. "Usually," Kyle nodded, "but sometimes we slip through the cracks. We fall here, "To the archive. We have been waiting, Captain." "Waiting for what?" "For a weapon," she said. She pointed at the city built on the stalagmites. "We have been building an army down here for centuries. We have the hate, we have the soldiers, but we lack the heavy artillery. We lack a ship that can sail through stone, eat electricity, and kill gods." She looked me in the eye. Her brass monocle spun, zooming in on the cracks in my obsidian arm. "You are damaged, Captain. That arm will shatter if you use it again. Your ship is bleeding. You need a dry dock. You need repairs." "And what is the price?" I asked, knowing the rhythm of this dance. "We fix you," Kyle said, extending her hand. "And then you lead us." "Lead you where?" She pointed up, at the stone ceiling miles above. "Back to the surface, to Sector 9. You started a fire, Blackwood, but you didn't finish it. The entity is wounded, not dead. When it reboots, it will purge this planet down to the bedrock to find you." She grinned, a feral, terrifying expression. "We don't want to hide anymore. We want to invade. We want to take our history back." I looked at Silas. He was looking at the motley crew of time-displaced warriors. He nodded slowly. "They are like us, Alistair," Silas whispered. "Ghosts who refuse to haunt quietly." I looked at Kale. I sheathed my cutlass. I extended my cracked obsidian hand. She took it. Her grip was iron-strong. "Very well, Admiral," I said. "Fix my ship, patch my arm, and I will show you how to turn a rebellion into a massacre." The Iron Maiden hummed in approval. The lights of the underground city flickered in greeting. We had a fleet. We had an army. And in the darkness of the earth, the second war for reality began. The dry dock in the archive was not a cradle, it was a cage. The Iron Maiden did not rest in water. She hung suspended in a vast cavern, held aloft by massive rusting chains and humming gravity dampeners scavenged from crashed ARCA interceptors. Her hull was a roadmap of violence. The scorch marks from the machine god's plasma, the cracked ribs from the subterranean dive, the splinters missing from the fight with the destroyer. She looked less like a ship and more like a flayed beast. "She is in pain," I said, my voice echoing in the cavern. I stood on a metal gantry overlooking the bow, clutching my shattered obsidian arm to my chest. Blue light leaked from the cracks in my skin, dripping onto the grating like glowing blood. "She is resilient," Kyle said, standing beside me. She was reading a holographic tablet that projected blueprints over the Maiden's hull. "But wood, even cursed petrified wood, has limits. If you want to punch through the crust again, she needs armor, real armor." "And me?" I asked, wincing as a spasm of agony shot up my shoulder. "Do I get armor, or do you just let me leak until I'm empty?" Kyle looked at my arm. The obsidian was flaking away, revealing the raw, burning energy of the gate beneath. I was dissolving. "You don't need a doctor, Captain," Kyle said, snapping her tablet shut. "You need a blacksmith." She led me away from the ship, down a spiral of carved stone stairs into the heat of the city's foundry. The air here tasted of sulfur and burning ozone. Sparks rained from the ceiling. In the center of the room, surrounded by half-assembled droids and piles of ancient gold, stood the Artificer. He was a man of immense girth, wearing a leather apron over a suit of steam-powered exoskeletal armor. He wore welding goggles that magnified his eyes to grotesque proportions. "Is this the anomaly?" the Artificer rumbled. His voice sounded like gravel in a mixer. "Fix him, Otto," Kyle ordered. "And upgrade him. He needs to interface with the fleet." Otto grabbed my good arm and hauled me toward a heavy iron chair. I sat, and metal clamps snapped around my chest and legs. "This will not be pleasant, Captain," Otto muttered, picking up a circular saw that spun with a laser edge. "You are half ghost, half stone. I have to graft titanium into the spirit lattice. Just do it," I gritted out. He didn't use anesthesia. He used a shot of whiskey and a leather strap for me to bite on. The saw touched my obsidian arm. I didn't scream, I roared. The pain wasn't physical, it was existential. It felt like he was cutting through my memories. I saw the San Gabriel. I saw Thomas dying. I saw the face of the machine god. Otto worked for hours. He cut away the shattered obsidian. He replaced the bone structure with rods of ARCA hyperalloy. He wove circuits made of gold and silicon into the silver veins of my nervous system. When he was done, he didn't seal the skin. He poured liquid metal over the limb, a living, shifting alloy that cooled into a matte black finish. "Open your hand," Otto commanded. I opened it. The movement was silent, smooth. The heavy, grinding sensation of the stone was gone. In the palm of my new hand, a port glowed with a soft amber light. "Universal interface," Otto explained, wiping grease from his goggles. "You can plug into any ship in the scavenger fleet. You can talk to their engines. You can steer them all at once." I stood up. I felt optimized, heavier, yet faster. "And the maiden?" I asked. "Look," Kyle pointed to a monitor on the wall. The camera feed showed the dry dock. Swarms of drones, scavenger drones, built from scrap, were crawling over the Iron Maiden's hull. They were welding plates of grey metal onto the black wood. They were installing banks of missile tubes alongside the cannon ports. They were fitting a massive, diamond-tipped drill cone over the bowsprit. She was no longer just a frigate. She was a dreadnought, a cybernetic lich ship. "We retrofitted her furnace," Kyle said. "She doesn't just eat souls or electricity anymore. We installed a cold fusion reactor from a stolen submarine. It amplifies the necrotic output." I walked back up to the gantry. I looked at my ship. She looked monstrous, beautiful. "I feel heavy," the maiden whispered in my mind. Her voice was clearer now, filtered through the digital implants in my brain. "I feel sharp." "You are a spear," I told her, "destined for the heart of the sky." I turned to Kyle. "The fleet?" "Ready," she said. We walked to the edge of the underground sea. The armada was assembled. It was a sight that would break the mind of any historian. There were destroyers painted with dragon scales. There were zeppelins fitted with ion thrusters hovering above the water. There were submarines with caterpillar tracks for crawling on land. Thousands of the erased, men and women displaced from time, stood on the decks, weapons raised. They didn't cheer when they saw me. They banged their weapons against their shields and hulls. A rhythmic, thunderous clamor. Clang, clang, clang. It was the heartbeat of an army that had been dead for too long. I climbed aboard the Iron Maiden. I walked to the new helm, a mix of the old iron wheel and a holographic command interface. I placed my new metal hand on the console. The amber port on my palm locked into the ship's system. Data flooded my vision. I saw the status of every ship in the fleet. I saw their fuel, their ammo, their fear. I was not just a captain anymore. I was the hive mind of the rebellion. "Admiral Kale," I broadcasted, my voice echoing from every speaker in the cavern. "What is the status of the target?" Kale's voice crackled in my ear. "Sector 9 is rebooting. The machine god is at 40% integrity. They are scanning the crust. They know we are coming." "Then let us not keep them waiting," I said. I looked up at the ceiling miles above, at the rock that separated us from the war. "All vessels," I commanded, "engage vertical thrusters. Formation, the spearhead." The Iron Maiden's new engines roared, a mix of fusion whine and ghostly moan. We lifted from the chains. "Maiden," I whispered. "Phase shift. Maximum density." The ship vibrated. We turned intangible, but this time we carried the fleet with us. A field of phase energy expanded from my ship, enveloping the armada. "Target the ceiling," I ordered. We rose. We accelerated. We hit the rock. We didn't crash. We slipped into the stone like a needle into skin. We were rising through the mantle, a fleet of ghosts swimming through the solid earth, heading for the surface, heading for the throat of the ARK Directorate. "Prepare for surface breach," I said, watching the depth meter scroll down rapidly. Depth, 5 miles, 3 miles, 1 mile. "Gentlemen," I said, gripping the wheel, feeling the collective rage of 10,000 lost souls flowing through my alloy arm. "It's time to say hello."